Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Family and Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Thursday, the 3rd of February. Earlier start than normal. If we can just go through the agenda before we start the main part of, some of the items on the agenda before we start the main part of the meeting. So if I can start with apologies for absence, please.
I've received apologies from Councillor Carr, Lynn Houghton and Alan Hodgson.
Okay. It's also an opportunity at this stage. We actually have a new member who's joined us this morning, and that's Councillor Anna Watson. And I think, Anna, you represent the Isabella ward in Blyth. So welcome to the meeting. So thank you very much for joining us. And I'm sure you'll find this scrutiny committee very enjoyable. And I did welcome Anne Dale at the previous meeting. So this is a second one, becoming a dab hand at this. If we can then move on to the minutes which are contained within your report, and they are items pages 1 to 6. Does anyone have any observations or items of accuracy on the minutes, pages 1 to 6 from the previous meeting? Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. Just one of the things I was able to sit and watch last as an observer. One of the points I was looking at was the Atkinson House, and I just wanted to know if the terms of reference is laid down by the Cabinet. And is Mr. Guy Renner-Thompson here? No, he's not. Oh, well, I just wondered then, it was just that I wondered if the Council had, or the Cabinet had looked at actually providing a bigger and newer site in the fact that we are going to have more children in need coming up through the years. I just wondered, as that is the framework, or were they specifically just for that one change?
So what I'll do, use my chair's indulgence to get an answer for you on that question. If Sue, perhaps you could pick that up.
Yes, so I think it also got brought up at this committee, actually, whether we'd looked at the alternative sites that had been suggested during the consultation. So I think from memory, a few weeks ago now, we got asked to look at Kirtley Hall and also Hexham Middle School. So obviously Kirtley Hall site isn't in the ownership of the local authority. They're also setting up their own specialist provision as well. And then in terms of Hexham Middle School, we felt that the site was too far in the west and actually wasn't central enough to meet the demands of the young people, as well as the challenges of that building being a grade 2 listed building and the ability to adapt it. And I think that's what we said last time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sue, for clarifying that. Any other items on the minutes there? I'm not seeing anybody indicating, so on that basis I'll sign them off as a true record of the previous meeting. We then come on to disclosures of members' interest. We all have our disclosures of members' interest published online. Are there any items pertaining to anything on the reports this morning which anybody needs to indicate? Hello.
John Sanderson, there's a report on the use of restraint at Kylo House. I'm an employee at Kylo House. I don't know whether that affects anything.
I would think that's a personal but not necessarily prejudicial on that one. But thank you for that, John. We'll note that. Okay, any other? I'm not seeing any. So then we move on to the forward plan of key decisions, which is pages 7 to 10 in your agenda pack this morning. And Chris Angus, you're going to take us through that one.
Thanks, Chair. There's 2 items on the forward plan for the attention of facts. Both are coming to facts. One of them is at this meeting. It's a school admissions arrangement. And the other one is Atkinson House, which will come back on the 3rd of March.
Great, thank you for that. We're now having a little bit of a change on the agenda item, so we're taking the first report this morning is the virtual school head teachers annual report. That's pages 57 to 78 in your agenda pack this morning. And Jane Walker is here, and you are the virtual head teacher, but very much real. So please take us through the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is my annual report for the academic year 2020 to 21. So I think it's probably helpful to give you a brief reminder of what actually happened in that year in the 3 terms. So the autumn term of 2020 was when children were returning to school after that first summer term of lockdown, where some schools were open for some children, but actually generally there wasn't very much learning happening, and a lot of children were at home without the level of school support that you would hope that they would have during a period of school closure. In the spring term, the schools were unexpectedly partially closed again, although a full programme of remote learning was then in place. And in the summer term, it was pretty much business as usual, although there were no tests and no examinations taking place. So in other words, for all children, there were frequent changes in routine, and school and children were affected by the COVID illness itself. We also had 62 school-age children coming into care at that time, which is a high number, and presented some challenges. In that context, the positives for looked after children are that they benefited from frequent contact with professionals and small group teaching when they were in school. We could see more children were doing their best at school as well because of the lack of the testing and the examinations or the threat of them later on in the year. On the other hand, many of our looked after children struggled to cope with the frequent changes in routines and sudden changes to larger classes. Actually, when the rest of the children came back to school, that was quite significant. A key challenge for schools was maintaining their staffing levels during that time, and we did then find that a lot of looked after children were working with adults who they didn't know. So either staff in schools who were being relocated to work with them, or actually temporary staff who were coming into school. And again, that had a negative impact on their experience. So in terms of what we did as a service, it's the ESLAC team, the Education Support for Looked After Children team, who provide that service to schools and the children. We had to adapt what we did. We had to do things differently, which is why the chapters in the report are headed in that way. And our focus was very much on safeguarding and stability so that learning could continue. So much of the support that went into schools was from educational psychologists. So they were working with school staff to provide training or to support them in their work with children. But they were also working directly with a significant number of children, as were the intervention workers who were providing therapeutic interventions. There were also the practicalities of making sure that the children could continue learning in those 3 different terms and 3 different kind of phases of learning. So we were obviously providing laptops and IT equipment, online learning resources, and doing quite a bit of training with the foster carers around that, the practicalities and the resources they could use online. So our services were adapted, they were flexible. There was a huge demand for them, obviously, and I think the impact was very positive around that. So in terms of the outcomes, I think despite the challenges, this is one of the more successful years that we've had for some time in terms of the outcomes for our looked after children. So I think as a summary, page 3 of the report, the headlines page is a useful way to do that. I now know there are no page numbers in the report, so apologies, but it is headed 2021 headlines. So in terms of what's gone well for us, again, in that context, there's been no permanent exclusions, and actually that's been the case since 2008, and those of you who have worked with me all of that time will know that I do comment on that every year, because it is quite an extraordinary achievement. A huge amount of work goes on with the schools, with the carers, with the families, with the children to make sure that stays the case. And 80% of our children progressing into further education is a really, really good outcome. So actually by September, the year 11, 91% of them were still in education, training and employment. 80% of that amount were going into further education, which is absolutely brilliant. And on top of that, they were also a higher proportion studying level 3 qualifications, which is the equivalent of A-level. So in previous years, we might see quite a lot of looked after children going into further ed, but they'd be repeating level 2 courses or lower. So the sort of long-term outlook for that is really very positive. That, of course, is on the back of the GCSE results also improving. So for the last 2 years, we've had almost the best results ever in terms of looking at children who achieve the basics, which is a grade 4 and above in English and maths. And for the last 2 years, we would have to attribute quite a lot of that to the fact that they hadn't had to do exams. It has been continuous assessment for them, or the centre assessed grades, which were submitted, and that has worked to the benefit of our children, and we are obviously very pleased about that, as were they. I have put in the good section there that 98% PEP completion is is a really good headline and a really good outcome. A PEP is a personal education plan, and it's actually a statutory requirement for all looked after children to have them. It is a part of the care plan. 98% completion means that the PEP is working to drive progress and achievement for those children, because it means that the reviews have been taking place on time, and it means that the right people are involved in the reviews, including the carers and the social workers. So actually 98%, and in comparison to what we know the completion rate is in other local authorities, is actually really good. So that's a very encouraging sign, given the context that I described of that year for everyone. So what is improving then, excuse me, are the GCSE results, and are the numbers that, again, like I've said, progressing into level 3 courses. I've put them in the improving section because obviously I want to see them improve more this year. So that's the challenge to the schools, to the children and to the support service, is that actually we're not sitting on our laurels around that. We want to drive that and for that to be even better this year. So the not yet good enough. The not yet good enough factors really are all of those that would indicate that stability isn't what we wanted it to be for looked after children. So the levels of persistent absence, the number of mid-year school moves, and the number of children receiving multiple fixed term exclusions is too high. I think we all understand the reasons why that might have been. I've just alluded to some of the changes in routine. I do elaborate on it more in the actual report, but clearly children aren't going to achieve well at school unless they're in stable school placements. So the breadth of the work that we do around that, I think, is worth noting. We work very closely with family placement around when there are potential home placement moves which might trigger a school move. And we also work really closely with the schools about what they use their pupil premium plus for, and if it's having maximum impact, and if it is actually targeting for those children who need it. That reduction in fixed term exclusions and that improvement in attendance. So in terms of the not yet good enough section, we know there's more work to be done, but we're also really realistic. I think I will be sitting here for the next couple of years telling you that they're still not yet good enough, although I would hope to come back and say that they've improved on what they were from last year. The indications this year would suggest that they are, so our forecasting and monitoring would suggest that. But we have a way to go with the pandemic, and we have to learn to expect the unexpected, don't we? So so hopefully we're going to continue to have an impact on those factors this year. Overall though, for me, it's always a year to be proud of the team and to be very proud of the children.
Thank you for that. I think what's disappointing is people at home can't see the lovely report that you've produced with the data dashboard, and good when you come back again that we actually get that as a PowerPoint. But what I want to commend you, this report, in terms of its simplicity and ease of reading, is very good. And just one other point before I open it up to members, you're hitting on a word there towards the end. It's not just you, it's a team, isn't it? And whilst you are virtual, you're very much real in the lives of these young people. And I think that's something which needs to be recognised, which we've done from that. You wanted to come back again, Jane?
Thank you, Chair. No, I've just left my mic on in case I had a question.
Okay, eagerly anticipating. Right, so questions from the Scrutiny Committee, please. Councillor Ball.
Yeah, well done for all the work in the past year, because it has been horrific, I think, and your team have done absolutely brilliant. Just with regards to the 80% of looked after children progressing into further education, I'm just wondering what kind of levels. I know it says further down that there's 33% of year 11s progressing to level 3. What are the rest of them doing? Are they going into vocational courses, level 2s, or access into education? What's happening with the rest of them? Thank you.
Yes, all of those things. They're all doing, some of them do level 2 courses, some of them do go and do GCSEs again, or try and catch up where they've clearly had missed learning during the normal time of the GCSE course. A lot of them are vocational though. That generally is the route that a lot of looked after children take from 14 plus, unless they're clearly committed to the academic pathway. And some have a combination of both. Some will be doing a combination of courses. But yes, it's a bit of a hodgepodge, but as I say, more now are doing the level 3, and that's really what we would want to be seeing.
I also have Sorry.
Every time I come in this room, there's someone either drilling or whatever it is. Something's going on every day we come in here. Can someone actually try and sort out the noise? Because I'm struggling to hear people.
So if anyone is watching at home, it's not your laptop or your TV that's dodgy. There's some work going on outside
It seems to
from
happen.
where we are.
I've been on every scrutiny committee that's on this week, and it's going on and on and on. I mean, I'm going to send an email to someone to say, what is this? Because it's just becoming unacceptable.
We'll pick that up, Richard. Valid point. Reverend Lennox, please, if you can come in.
Just to follow on from Councillor, I do appreciate his comments. I thought it was my hearing aid that was going off, you know. A terrible buzzing noise. I would like to commend this report. It's a really excellent report, very easy to read. Particularly, I was pleased to see quite a lot of numerical and statistical data involved. But I've just got a couple of questions, if I may, and an observation. On page 67, it talks about including one-to-one tuition for year 11 pupils. Have we got any idea of the proportion of those who are involved in one-to-one tuition?
All looked after children in year 11 and in year 6 actually are offered one-to-one tuition. It's not the right solution for every child. So the schools will tell us if it's appropriate or not. The children themselves will tell us if they want to work with an adult who perhaps they don't know, or if they don't think it's the right thing for them. But normally about 2/3 of the cohort, and certainly in that year about 2/3 of the cohort did take up the offer. And it clearly did work for them, especially from January onwards, when we knew that there were going to be the centre assessed grades for them and not the exams for them to take. Ideally, we would like all of them to do it, but it has to be the right person working with that child, and that can't always happen.
Thank you. And the following page, when it talks about alternatives to exclusion, looking for alternatives to, have we any indication of the success of this and any data showing the success of the alternatives to exclusion?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because you're asking me for data on the exclusions that we prevent in the work that we do, and that's actually really difficult to measure. What we would say is that we just have to relentlessly work with the schools around saying, don't exclude that child, let us work with you and work with that child, let us look at your behaviour policy, because quite often schools will resort to a fixed term exclusion because they think they say it's the fair application of the policy and wouldn't be fair on other children if they made exceptions to looked after children. So really what we try to do is prevent the exclusions in the first place, and that can mean working with the schools to help them understand better the needs of that individual child, and then work with them around strategies that have worked with other children or that might work in other schools. So it is really difficult to quantify, but I would say to you that I think that fixed term exclusion data that's in the report would be higher if we hadn't have done all the work that we had last year. And I think it's one of the reasons why we're sort of mitigating the damage or the impact of COVID on achievement in schools. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't have the data on what we've prevented.
Just finally, just one observation. I'm always interested in statistical trends, and on page 76, persistent absence, has gone from a half to a third. The trend is down. That's excellent, and I think notable as far as the figures are concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, it has, and that's a huge amount of work has gone into that. So we now have an education welfare officer who works in the ESLAC team, and her caseload is the children who are the most difficult to engage. And when we say it's persistent absence, technically that's attendance that's below 90%, but for some of our looked after children, it's actually a lot lower than that and can be below 20 or 10%. So that's a lot of work goes into one-to-one work or intensive programs with those children, and we can't do that on our own. That has to be done with the care team, and the decisions around what works with those children is always done with the care team. So underlying that figure is a huge breadth of work there, which obviously is about teamwork in its broadest sense.
Councillor Dunbar and then Councillor Swinburne.
Yeah, I always are, and I'm really pleased in the way that you've adapted. And maybe I should know because I've always been a corporate parent working group. Are the copies of this virtual, the head report, the report, going to all members? Because all members are corporate parents, and I think it would be useful if they did get a copy of it sent to them by email. Wayne?
We should have... Graham, sorry.
I think that's an excellent idea,
Yeah.
Councillor, but also I think when we do get to presenting to full council about the range of activities of social care, but particularly around corporate parents, we'll push that message, but I think it's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
And I'd like to say that about all of the annual reports that we received. I think when we did have a members' room in the long and distant past before COVID in the building, we used to have the reports there to pick up and read in the members' room, and we don't have that now. We've got nowhere to go. And I think it would be really useful if all these annual reports were made available and sent electronically to all members.
Yeah, okay, good point.
Sorry, but I didn't put that on.
Mark Swinburne, and then Councillor Dale.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report, you know, we're covering a challenging area and through challenging times. And while we sit here and there's a lot of discussion about, you know, figures, and I'm going to relate to these figures here. We'll mention Key Stage 4 on one of the pages, and it says, for the third consecutive year, achievement at GCSE continued to improve and has almost tripled since 2019. Tripled since 2019, and that's, you know, people achieving the basics at grade 5 plus. You know, that's, you know, lots of numbers, but that's a fantastic achievement from, as we've said, a team effort. But to put that into context, you know, as I said, you know, a challenging area for these individuals. We're talking about the lives and the futures of individuals here and the difference that this makes, and it's because of the work of, you know, the team at the council, you know, and those individuals who've worked so hard to make that positive effect on those children. So while we sit here and we look at a report, and this is a fantastic report, you know, thank you so much for bringing it here. It's the impact that it has on those individuals and their future. That is what this is all about. So thank you so much for the, not just the report, but for the work that the team does. Thanks.
I would just like to say thank you very much for that feedback, and I will make sure that that gets back to the team too. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dale.
Sorry, thank you. And just to credit everybody, all the staff, because actually the report is lovely. It's great as a person who really cares, and we all care about our children coming through, and certainly these children, and to read something that really highlights their future. And thank you, because it is a credit to you all. Just one or two things. I mean, obviously with the PEP completion, you've obviously got the right people in the right place dealing, you know, with the problems, and that's not always easy. But the other one is, just for instance, you've got 62 children new to care, and you've got 100 who've left care. And I just wondered if you actually had any feedback about those children who've left, and how their lives have progressed, and you know, your stable starting points for them all. So I just wondered, just, you know, it'd be lovely to hear you've got real successes, that people, children who've actually moved forward after they've left care. And just one last one then. So the other one is, it's just about the exclusions. And exclusions are difficult, but they also happen throughout all schools. Is there any particular schools where it's hard for you to manage children with exclusions because of the actual environment that child is in? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes. So thank you for your kind comments. In terms of the children who leave care during the year, they're all included in this report, and they're all included in the figures. So if they were looked after at any time during the academic year, then for this report this year, they're all in there. We don't just drop children once
know,
they leave care. So they're not required to have a PEP anymore, and obviously they wouldn't have the full ongoing support of the care team, but we still continue to work with the schools around them. And if they've left care, the school still has the pupil premium plus for them for that year. So we do see things through to a natural conclusion. At the moment, we don't monitor them once they're out of that academic year, and we don't look at their destinations. However, from September this year, the virtual school head has an extended duty to promote the education of children with a social worker. So we will be, and we're putting all the mechanisms in place this year for us to be able to do that. So yes, we'll be able to see the ongoing impact that being in care had on the child, which for the school narrative, the education narrative, we would hope would continue to be positive. The exclusions. I think we know which schools that we work with most around exclusions for children, and it's often the most inclusive schools that we work with around that because, you know, there's no correlation between whether a child's getting a fixed term exclusion and where the school might happen to be. I think during the pandemic, there were some challenges around the school environment that resulted in exclusion because schools had so many restrictions on how they would normally operate during the school day. So even something like a one-way system in a school to be COVID secure really affected how the child might be able to cope in that environment, but also how the school could respond when incidents were occurring or when a child needed particular support. Generally, the exclusions offer behaviour-related issues. So again, schools had difficulties with that, the social distancing and everything else that had to be in place. So I think all schools is probably the answer to your question. All schools had a challenging environment to work in with children with complex and sometimes urgent needs. So their ability to be reactive was impeded in many cases. So we had to work with schools around that, and the schools had to try and work with us around that in a different way. I think it is one of the reasons that the figure has gone up, that the fixed term exclusions have gone up, but we understand that.
I think that's all credit to you, actually, because it is very difficult, has been difficult, even within, you know, schools, with all the schools in Northumberland, because with the pandemic and everybody's mixed a bit of turmoil with changing this and changing that. So you would have to change all the working relationships you have with schools over the time.
Yeah. And I think it's a good point to raise, because although we all know that schools had to make different arrangements to be COVID safe, I think until you had to see how you walked through that day in a school yourself, you probably, you know, the general public maybe don't understand just how challenging that was for the staff in the schools, and still is. And then when you've got children with complex needs who you're working with, that obviously adds to the challenge again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to bring in Graham Wright, who's Service Director for Children's Services.
Yeah, and it's very appreciate the members' comments and appreciation of the work of the virtual school. And I will make the point that I think our virtual school in Northumberland is a real strength for us, and particularly taking our young people and supporting them through the pandemic. That has been recognised in previous inspections as well. But it's also the integrated work that the virtual school does. It doesn't operate in isolation, and Jane and her team certainly push and work very effectively across all of our services. So we'll be talking in a later item about sufficiency, the strategy for placements for our children and young people. But clearly one of the key elements of trying to support stability is give stability within the school placement and support the educational achievements and attainments of the young people. And that's a key part of our overall work. But also just very specifically in relation to care leavers, one of the key roles that Jane does is continue to develop with our colleagues opportunities for our children, looked after children and young people going into education, employment and training opportunities. So developing promises across all the council directorates and wider people and giving them opportunities there. And I will push that here because I know that's being developed and pushed through the corporate parenting group. We're just developing a skills audit for counsellors there, which will be coming back to the next corporate parenting group next week. But it's about, again, about everybody's responsibility as well to do that. Let's say Jane and her team, the wider work in developing opportunities for, excuse me, for our care leavers is a real strength for us as well.
Thank you, Graham. There are two things that we're asked to do this morning. One is to note the report, and the other one is to have some ongoing challenge. So here goes. We've had some really good comments. So what I want to do is is drill down a little bit on your priorities for 2022. So you mentioned earlier on that in the report, it's very clear in the graphics what's still not good enough. So what I'm hoping is, and I'm sure you can, provide assurance to the Scrutiny Committee that you have an action plan, which is measurable, achievable, and obviously we'll come back here so that we can measure you against why things are not good enough. And I suppose the question to that is, what is it you need to help you turn that not good enough to brilliant like the rest?
Thank you, Chair. So the priorities that are identified in the report are now in the Virtual School Improvement Plan. So like a real school, we work in that cycle of self-evaluation and then have the improvement plan in place. The improvement plan has governance at the moment through the MALAP, which is a multi-agency looked after partnership, and that acts as the governing body of the virtual school, and that in turn reports to the Safeguarding Corporate Parenting Advisory Group. So we are held to account throughout the year for progress on these priorities. So the answer to your question is yes. Obviously, we can report back on at any regular interval on the progress towards achieving these.
And then the second thing is, on the priorities, which is listed on what is page 75 of this report, priorities for 22, it talks about, there's a couple of things, improving retention of care leavers, education, training and employment. How?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. We're really good at getting young people into education, training, employment at the end of year 11. So we had 91%, which actually meant there were only 3 young people out of that cohort who were NEET at the time in September. But the challenges of keeping young people on those courses, say on a 2-year A-level course, is where the challenge really comes in, because as a virtual school, we lose a lot of the day-to-day contact with them. And obviously in the pandemic, that's created different issues and different challenges for young people in terms of them staying on their courses. So we might have had young people going into A-level courses or some onto degree courses in the last couple of years, but because it's mainly remote, because they don't then have residence to go into and have to find alternative accommodation for themselves, etc., that all impacts on whether or not they're going to stay in the courses that they've chosen. So we have 2 careers guidance officers now in the virtual school, and they work really closely with Northumberland Adolescent Services. And in Northumberland Adolescent Services, we support young people in their through their pathway plans. So the PEP becomes part of a pathway plan post-16. And we monitor, obviously, with the social workers, we keep in contact with those young people in education, training and employment, so that we can know if there's going to be any issues, if they need any support to stabilise or to move into something different, and we'll support them to do that. So the challenge is really there for us around that, and we have to do that with other partners. So, for example, every month we have what we call an EAT clinic, and at that clinic we have membership from the virtual school, from Northumberland Adolescent Services, from the DWP. Health professionals are also there who'll be working with young people. And at that panel, we track those who we think are at risk of dropping out of their education, training and employment. And that's hugely effective. The fire service are involved in that now as well, all kinds of local authority agencies as well as external agencies. So we have a number of things in place to help us to do that, and we are working differently around that because of the different circumstances by asking different agencies to get involved. It is better than it was, so our overall EAT figures are much better than they were a couple of years ago. We would obviously want to see that improve as well.
Okay, and then the final bit from me on this one is, I'm intrigued by this 5. Develop attachment-aware and trauma-informed schools. How are you going to do that? Because I don't think people are actually aware. I know some, speaking bluntly, some people out there think we've got lots of naughty children who are just naughty for the sake of it. A lot of these young people have come from extremely traumatic upbringings with very challenging behaviours around them, which none of which is their fault. So I'm really intrigued about what's going to happen there and what impact you think that'll have.
Yeah, and that links back to the questions that we've had about fixed term exclusions as well and alternatives to exclusion. So we've had this ambition for several years in the virtual school that actually putting sticking plasters on what's going on in school isn't going to help things long term, and that actually what we want is for schools, all schools and all members of staff in school, not just the teaching staff, to understand the needs of looked after children. The majority of our children go into care in the category of neglect, and that means that they have had adverse childhood experiences. Most of them have attachment issues. They've all experienced trauma. So for years, we've actually invested in the Thrive Attachment Programme, which is very successful. We've trained local authority staff, we've trained nearly all schools. We offer that free from the virtual school. We fund it through Pupil Premium Plus, that we top slice from schools. It's very effective, it's very popular, it's part of the wider mental health programme as well. So we know that it's having an impact, there's traction there. What we want to do this year, though, and especially because we now have this extended duty around all children who've had a social worker and have got a social worker, so it's a huge number of children. We want to know that the schools can identify that in children who are not just looked after children. Lots of children who aren't in care have had these experiences too. And what we're putting together with educational psychologists and with other mental health professionals and with the Care Northumberland group, I don't know if you're aware of the Care Northumberland group that's working around adverse childhood experiences, is we want to come up with criteria for the schools to say, yes, this is an attachment aware and trauma informed school because, and they have various things in place in their school policies, in their approach to working with children, in the training of the staff, and in the outcomes for some of the targeted vulnerable children or children who need help. So that's what we're working on, and we want to add more layers to that by inviting more people into that work, and that will happen through the project work stream for the social worker work.
Great, thank you for that. So, Councillor Swinburne. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, just want to come in on, when we talk about the retention, and I know you've mentioned about the public body involvement, etc., and I might be miles off the track here, but where are we with private industry and bringing businesses in? And I'm going to mention the word sponsorship here, but, getting the private sector involved to show these people what's on offer. I'm going back a couple of years here, probably many, but conscious of the fact that you go through A-levels and you have your A-levels, and then some people were lucky enough to get sponsorship through university, but there is the track of studying A-levels, right? What am I going to do? Go to university, and I know many people who have never used their university degree for what they thought they were going to do, and they just sit there and they get a job. But there's always that, and I've got children at the moment, well, what am I going to do? There's not that link with business to understand what their A-levels can lead to in employment, what their degrees can lead to in employment, and we need to plug in, and with these children and all children, if we have businesses coming in to give them that helping hand and get them to understand along the track and at the end of their A-levels, our businesses in this area, and we can nurture these people in this area and help them to develop. Our businesses can hopefully say, right, we've helped you, and ask for sponsorship, get them to sponsor them through university and nurture them and guide them, but get in early in the A-level stage to help them and see what futures they can have.
So before that's answered, you've sparked a lot of interest because I've got Graham and Audrey who want to come in.
I know what Graham's going to say.
So I think maybe Graham can pick on that, and then Audrey.
It absolutely is part of our overall strategy. So I've talked already about within the council and across the council developing opportunities for our children and young people who are looked after and the care leavers. But one of the things we have got is that corporate parenting is a corporate priority. So, for example, any procurement commissioning would have looking at that as an area of social responsibility to, so wherever there is commissioning undertaken, if there is opportunities for us to be offering chances for whatever way for our looked after children and young people, they will do that. But equally, there's some very specific develops with private industry, and I'll probably pass over to my colleague Audrey Kingham just to say a bit more about that. And
Councillor Swinburne, just to answer that, we recognised probably a couple of years ago that there was a gap between education and industry in general, and actually a gap between corporate parenting and industry across the county. It's an opportunity for us to pick up. We've done a huge amount of work with industry and links in general, and you will hear that in some of my report later, and also the annual education report that comes to the next Facts Committee meeting with some examples of exactly what you talked about, so that joining up around opportunities, route-ways, sponsorship, degree apprenticeships, higher apprenticeships, etc. And we aim to start that much earlier in the preparation for adulthood model that will be rolled out across Northumberland. But what I can say to you is, and Graham and I, mostly Graham, but I have worked with Graham a little bit on this, have begun to work with industry around finding someone to give us a blueprint across Northumberland. And we have our industry sponsor who will start that work with us, and that is Tharsis and Blythe. They're our first business who will pick up and work alongside us, which is about a corporate parenting pledge. So they will be really clear about how they want to support care leavers, looked after children. They will be very specific. They are very keen to clearly understand their own demographic around Blythe and the impact they can have there, but also across the rest of Northumberland, and that will be a priority for us. So there is a small group of people working on that, and we will bring that to corporate parenting, and I'm sure we'll bring that back to this committee as the first one. So we're on the way.
Jane, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, can I just add a bit to that, which is linked to what Graham was saying about the corporate parenting work and getting promises from each of the services. So most of the promises so far contain a commitment from local authority services around apprenticeships or around creating work experience or job opportunities for our young people. But we've struck gold really through our work with procurement and the promise that they have put forward. And we're now involved through the social values in procurement policy. We've now created opportunities on the Northumberland Line project for looked after children and care leavers. So we're at the stage now where we met last week with the company who was successful on that bid. And we're in their early doors to identify the children who might be appropriate for those different apprenticeships, etc., with a promise that there'll be jobs for life there for them once they've had those experiences with them. So there's apprenticeships, there's work experience, definitely on the table, and we're working with them on other opportunities we might be able to create along the way. And in turn, they've offered support around writing CVs, interview preparation, all of those kind of things that will benefit the communities that are along the line, actually, because I think there's 5 train stations, aren't there, and all the car parks and all the things that go into that. So it's a massive project, and I'm sure out of that there will be different types of opportunity to suit some of our care leavers. So that work just from within the local authority is brilliant, and then the work that Audrey's going to do, which will obviously be much broader than the public sector only. Obviously, we need to be in there as corporate parents to make sure that the opportunities are coming forward. But the Northumberland line will be great to exemplify that, I think.
That's good. So a virtual head teachers report, which has led us into this detailed analysis of the corporate links that we're going to develop. So that just shows about joined up thinking, which is excellent. So on the agenda item, we're asked to do 2 things. Note it. I think we have all noted it. And we've put some, also note the ongoing challenges you face, and we've put some suitable challenge. So on that point, I'm happy to accept the report, and thank you again, and please pass on our appreciation to your whole team and yourself for doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I will absolutely pass on the comments to the team. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right, we're now moving on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the school admission arrangements for community and voluntary controlled schools, pages 11 to 56 on your agenda pack this morning, and this is being taken by Sue Addison. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report informs Cabinet of the outcomes of a consultation on the school admission arrangements for community and voluntary controlled schools for the academic year 23-24. And this is an annual requirement as set out in the school admissions code that was amended in 2021. Therefore, Cabinet are being asked to approve the arrangements for that year as set out in the recommendations of the report. So really, on an annual basis, the local authority needs to determine its ambition arrangements for our schools, and as the council's decision-making body, Cabinet is therefore asked to approve the arrangements for the academic year 23-24. So in line with the admissions code, a 6-week consultation was carried out on the arrangements, together with proposals to reduce the planned admission numbers for Seaton Delaval First School and Pegswood Primary School. During the consultation, there were only 2 responses received within the period. The responses were received from Pegswood Primary and Seaton Delaval First Schools, with both governing bodies supporting the proposals to reduce their planned admission numbers. No further comments were received from anyone else during the consultation period, although this is not unusual, given that we aren't making any amendments to the arrangements for 23-24. And full copies of all the arrangements are contained within the appendices to the full report. Therefore, Chair, that's all we need to say on that one. Thank you.
And this is a regular report that we get. It's a statutory function that we need to carry out. Does anyone have any comments or observations? Councillor Swinburne and Councillor Dunbar.
Just one question, Chair, if I could ask. The change in numbers, is that in relation to a downturn in the intake of children in those areas, or is it in relation to any change in the school reorganisation in those areas?
No, it's predominantly for Seaton Delaval. I think you'll see in the report it talks about parental choice. So we will have expanded that school probably about 4 years ago, thinking the demographic of the community had actually changed, grew additional capacity and turned the school from a planned admission number of 30 to 45. But therefore parental choice. Parents have chosen to go to other schools, and the number is making it difficult for the school to plan on a yearly basis, and therefore that's why we're asking for a reduction for 30. And exactly the same for Pegswood. Parents are choosing other schools in the local area rather than Pegswood, and keeping the planned admission number at 30 for both schools makes it much easier for head teachers to plan moving forward.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to check, because I know previous reports we've had here are showing like a downturn in children numbers overall, so I just wanted to check that. Thanks.
Councillor Dunbar, then Councillor Thorne.
Thank you, Chair. We've got all the figures for local authority schools and the plan numbers. Are you aware of academy numbers, and are you happy with them? It's just recently a colleague has raised within a group of us about a particular school and their capacity. Are you aware of them? Are you happy with them?
Yeah, obviously academies are their own admission authority. Lots of academies in Northumberland still do use our admission arrangements. They still use our admissions policy. They adopt that in full. But other academies do make alternative arrangements and do use different admission policies. We are consulted where possible. We try to influence them, so I can't say we're 100% happy with all of them, because it does provide some turbulence in the system. But we do continue to work with all of our academies to make sure that they meet the needs of their local community, which is really predominantly what the admissions policy is around. If there's a specific issue that you've got, Councillor, we can pick that up outside of the meeting, and we can have a more detailed discussion about that one, if it would help.
Thank you, that please. Marvellous, thank you.
Councillor Thorne.
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to ask Sue Aviston the effect of, the huge amount of house building that we are doing across the county. And, I look at my own village, Longframington, 400 houses. We've built 300 new houses. How does that factor into the school admissions policy?
So yes, we always make sure that those numbers are predicted, are planned for, and I think it was probably a couple of meetings ago when I came to FACS with the school organisation plan that sets out how we monitor, how we predict the numbers coming through. So we will continue to monitor those numbers both from house building and for birth rates, and where schools need to expand to meet that demand. Predominantly that's on a temporary basis. Once people move into new homes, they have the children grow up, it's not a constant number, and we're finding that particularly in the Morpeth partnership where we're dealing with bulges of numbers actually going through the system. And you'll have, at this committee received reports where we've expanded provision currently in the middle schools in Morpeth, and then in probably 18 months time we'll be coming to talk about how we're going to expand places at the high school. So it's something that we monitor on twice a year. Every 6 months we're monitoring what's happening, and we're making the plans for the following September should things need to change. Obviously, when it comes to providing funding for that, again, that's all set out in the school organisation plan. Where the numbers are generated due to house building, we look at contributions from the house builder through section 106 funding arrangements, and again the policy around how we calculate that has also been through to this committee for approval and comment. Thank you.
Are you satisfied with that answer? Right, because going back to January 2020, we actually implemented an education levy on house building, which is precisely to deal with some of those bulges which occur. And I know certainly when I was Cabinet Member Children's Services, Sue and a team put in extra capacity in Blythe and in the Seaton Valley Partnership and in Morpeth. So it is something which is absolutely on the radar of the team here, is the impact of house building on the flow through of children into our schools. But I think it's a valid point to raise there. Yeah. Okay, so I don't see any other hands wishing to speak on this item. You'll note there that this is our views going to Cabinet, so we'll obviously pass on those comments, including the comments relating to house building. We have in total 6 recommendations that we have been asked to comment on. I think it's presumably the will of the committee that we pass this on to Cabinet for them to make their final decision, which obviously is a statutory function. I'm not seeing any objection. So, yeah, on that basis, we'll move that report. So thank you very much for that, Sue. We're now moving on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the Northumberland Strategic Safeguarding Partnership Annual Report 2020 to 2021. And Paula Mead, who is down here, Paula, I'm sure you will introduce yourself to members, and you're going to take us through this report, which is page 79 to 122 in your agenda packs.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Paula Mead. I'm the Independent Chair and Scrutiny Chair of the Children's Safeguarding Partnership in Northumberland, and also the Chair of the Adult Safeguarding Partnership in Northumberland and North Tyneside. So thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to talk through the report. Just some background and context of what the report is and why we produce the report. It's actually the second report of the Northumberland Strategic Safeguarding Partnership, because that previous to that, members will be aware there was arrangements called local safeguarding children's boards, which were abolished through the Children and Social Work Act in 2017, and a requirement to set up strategic safeguarding partnerships. The arrangements need to be explained in the annual report, which looks back to say what did we do, what did we achieve, did we progress against our stated priorities? If we didn't, what were the shortcomings and what do we need to do to make improvements? So I suppose just to say something very briefly about the difference in what the safeguarding partnership is, it basically puts a duty on local authority, on the police and on CCGs to who are called safeguarding partners, to ensure that the safeguarding system in a specified area, in this case in Northumberland, is actually functioning and working as it should work. And there are also a number of relevant agencies who would previously have been members of LSCBs, so for example the health trusts, voluntary organisations, all of whom have duties to safeguard children. So this report, there are certain requirements that have to be included in the report, and that includes, so for example, that includes the need to evidence impact and analyse, as say, progress of our stated priorities. And it also needs us to evidence decisions and actions following recommendations of local and national safeguarding practice reviews, previously called serious case reviews, which again I'm sure you'll be aware of. The ways in which partners have sought to use feedback from children and young people to inform the work, and also if there is a secure establishment in the area, then a review of restraint. So these are all requirements within the report, and it can look quite sort of detailed and wordy and data driven. So we've also produced a children and young people's version of the report, which is a bit more accessible and probably we hope specifies the things that are important in the report to young children and young people. So one of the important points that we have to talk about in the report are how we achieve our priorities. And last year we did a review of our priorities, because some of them had been in place for a couple of years, and obviously with the pandemic that it felt very timely to crack on and review them and just see where we were and whether we needed to refresh them. So previously, in fact the annual report includes previous, if you like, because it happened to change, the change happened in year, so previous priorities and priorities going forward. So there's probably quite a bit of reference to a number of priorities that may be in each annual report going forward. There won't be as many. So previously we had prevention and early help as one of our priorities. That's showing quite good progress now, and there's lots of evidence to say how it's showing good progress, and that's within the detail of the report. We feel now that approach to early help and prevention, preventing children and families' situations deteriorating, is well embedded in Northumberland. Working with fathers, that's always something that's on our radar, but again progress has been made, and that's demonstrated through some of the audits and evidence that we've gathered from local safeguarding practice reviews. And also there's reference to the sharing information regarding safeguarding, otherwise known as SIRS, which is where midwives coordinate with GPs to make sure that fathers, perhaps who are not necessarily in the same practice as the mothers, but to make sure that those fathers are we're joined up in terms of our information sharing if there are risks or potential risks to children. And that's been a really I think well developed piece of work, and it was actually mentioned nationally. So we're quite proud of that piece of work, because it's not something that happens everywhere else. So we've decided that, although we need to keep an eye certainly on working with fathers, that's absolutely key. That we feel we've made enough progress with that to move on. Improving the focus on the child's experience and work continues. That again was a stated priority, and there always is more work to do with that, but we've left that one to one side. That doesn't mean that the work isn't still ongoing. Criminal and sexual exploitation, that was another priority previously. The Joint Targeted Area Inspection, which took place in 2019, set out requirements that we needed to put in place. They are in place now. Again, that's embedded. We have a sexual exploitation strategy and committee, which is joint committee with the adult, children's and also the community safety partnership. We're making good progress with that. So new priorities going forward, clearly COVID and the impact of COVID, it had to be included as a priority. And that's an overarching priority because it impacts on really every other priority that we have. Mental health, that's, again, you can see the links between maybe our concerns about children and young people's mental health and the impact of COVID and the lockdowns that we've had. So there's reference to mental health and what we're doing with that in there. Neglect was a previous priority, and we're continuing to focus on neglect because it's a stubborn problem in Northumberland. Again, not helped really by COVID and certainly, you know, the impact that has on families and communities in terms of poverty and so forth. So there's a lot of work we're doing. We're doubling down on that. We've drilled down into the data, and we're continuing to have a real strong focus. And there's a summit planned in May for a multi-agency summit plan to look at the issue of neglect. Domestic violence and child to parental violence and abuse, that again is a priority exacerbated through COVID and lockdown. So again, a focus on that as one of our priorities. And then the final priority is under ones and the non-accidental injuries impacting on under ones because they're 8 times more likely to be injured or die as a result of non-accidental injury. So those are the priorities that we comment on and report on in the report. We also are obliged to comment on the number of what were called serious case reviews and are now called local children safeguarding practice reviews, which are the national reviews that we have to undertake. There were 2 of those over the previous year, and there were 3 local learning reviews. And they are reviews that we undertake because we feel, although they don't necessarily meet the criteria for the national reviews, there is learning that needs to happen, and it would be useful. And there were 4 rapid reviews as well. So I think I think we do have evidence of progress with good engagement. My own view as a outsider, if you like, as a scrutineer, is that the partnership working in Northumberland has always been good and continues to be good. Partners have worked really well together during these difficult last couple of years, really, in terms of the pandemic, and the integration in terms operationally, the integration and the work that's gone on through the multi-agency safeguarding hub, the MASH, has really demonstrated, I think, that the partners are working well together. Agencies are still engaging with children and young people. There's always more work to do with that. That's always a challenge, so that it isn't tokenistic and that we actually use what they say. They know that we use what we say, and that we understand their lived experience, and that we build that into practice, and that will just continue to need a focus, really. We still need to continue to evaluating and demonstrating impacts always is a challenge. And we need to really still do some more work on developing our understanding of which interventions work and which add value through multi-agency audits, through shared intelligence, deep dives and evidence-based reflective practice. So that's something that is, as I say, continues as a challenge, and we need to really still continue to focus on that. I don't think I'm going to say any more, but very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive summary of the report. I'm going to take some questions now. So if I go to Councillor Ball first, then Councillor Dale, and then Reverend Lennox.
So, with regards to the report, I just want to raise some massive concerns, to be honest. So, on page 90, the strategic priorities, where it says exceptional levels of poverty driving dramatic rises in child prevention interventions in the number of children in care. I'm just looking, obviously I've had this report a few days now. I've had a look and tried to look at things at the poverty rates within Wansbeck. So I've been marrying things up with the poverty report for Wansbeck. 26.8% of children in the North East are in poverty. 35% in my ward of children are in poverty. Of them, 64.2 are from households in work. If we're going to see a rise, and these figures are 2019, 2020, pre-pandemic, these figures are going to get worse. We're going to see efficiencies and budgets coming up. How on earth are we going to manage going forward with poverty levels rising? And we're going to see a direct impact, because if you put the information from this report across the top of the heat maps of children going into care for Wansbeck, they marry up. So I do have a big concern. And the other thing, I'm just wondering, is there any other information, like a breakdown of wards in like children in poverty for Hexham, for Berwick, for Bye Valley, because there is that direct correlation between the two. Thank you.
Per ward.
Yeah. So on that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in Graham as a response. But I think on your second part of your question, the answer is yes, we do have that detail. But Graham. Yeah.
Certainly on the second part, yeah. And so, for example, coming to corporate parenting in the performance reports, there'll be the home address of those young people who've become looked after from that. And certainly, absolutely undoubtedly, deprivation and poverty makes good parenting much more difficult. I've got to say, regionally, the North East Association of Children's Services, there's an independent national review of children's social care currently going on, and the directors of children's services put a submission into that, noting the impact of poverty on children and families and their ability to access services and the tensions and pressures that brings. So absolutely it's factored in, but equally I'll also always make the point that when we're talking about local authority work and for children becoming looked after, there are very specific legal criteria that need to be met around significant harm, which will be an assessment of individual circumstances to make sure that we are protecting the children at that level. But absolutely, a lot of the range of the services, and as Paul has covered in the report, the range of early help services, a lot of our early help preventative services are targeted communities where there is increased deprivation. Our work of the Northumberland communities together also is part of that. So a kind of whole system approach to try and mitigate the impacts on children of poverty are in place. But then when there are specific child protection concerns, they have to be assessed around the individual risks and issues for that child, and how then we can pull, as Paula says, the critical bit is safeguarding being everybody's business. No one agency can solve this, and it has to be effective partnership working, and that's why Paula's role as independent scrutineer and challenge to all of the agencies, not just local authority, is crucial to make sure we're keeping on there. But going back to the point, absolutely poverty and deprivation does make good parenting much more harder and is much more challenging to mitigate the effects of that.
And I suppose the point on that as well, to add to what Graham said, and it goes back to the earlier report we had from the virtual head teacher, is we don't know what the figures would look like if we did nothing, because we are doing a lot. And actually, the interventions around the virtual social worker team, the social workers that we have, the multi-agency approach around working in some of those areas. If that's the report which Ian Levy produced, which I've read, there is a whole system approach which sits around some of those communities. So a lot of intervention is going in. And if that didn't happen, the figures would probably look disastrous. But we have to commend the amount of work which is put in both from statutory and voluntary sector organisations to make this. And this gives a snapshot of some pockets in the communities that we live in, And it's actually a call to action as well, isn't it? Which I think is the point. Yeah. Okay.
So I just pick up again just on one of the priorities that Paula had talked about there about the effectiveness of our early help work across the partnership. And if we remember back to the pandemic, when in the first start of it, there was a concern that social work would be overwhelmed. People were talking about a tsunami of referrals coming in. The schools came back in September 20. Now, that didn't happen in Northumberland. And one of the reasons that didn't happen was the effectiveness of our range of early intervention and support services, making sure we're trying to support and access, or people could access support and interventions at early stages before it got to the level of requiring statutory intervention. And in Northumberland, we probably booked a lot of trends in terms of the level of increase that came once the schools came back. It didn't overwhelm social work, and I think that was a reflection of the range of preventative and early intervention work that we do have in place here.
If I can bring Paula in then, if you want to come in with your response. Yeah, Paula.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that obviously, well, it is obvious, I suppose, that poverty is absolutely going to have an impact on families and on parents' ability to cope. But I also want to say that actually children experience neglect across the whole socio-economic spectrum. In fact, it's not, you know, it isn't just in socially deprived communities, so to speak. That's not to undermine what has been said, because I absolutely hear what is being said there. So, you know, I've also said in my report that children actually also experience happy and safe childhoods, again, you know, across all the socio-economic spectrum. And there's quite a nice case study in that I hope you've been able to read in the report, which a case study is one family, but it spells out all of the intervention that went in to help this particular child, and there was bereavement involved in the family as well, that actually probably, you know, made a really tangible difference to that child's life and that family's life. And looking at that, certainly prevented that moving from early help and early intervention into the safeguarding, into the child protection arena. So it is a challenge, there's no doubt about that, but all agencies are very, very firmly focused on it and, you know, doing what they can with it.
Did you want to come back to that?
Yeah, as I say, I just wanted to raise the concern around poverty, because obviously it does have an impact on life chances, life expectancy, where you're going to end up long term. So, and just things like literacy and numeracy levels are all interlinked as well. So it is just to raise that concern, and especially when it says in the report the increase of interventions and number of children coming into care, especially when we're going to see cuts next year and the year after with regards to children's services. Thank you.
Councillor Dale and then Reverend Lennox.
Thank you very much, Paula. It's a long time since I've been here to listen to your reports, but thank you for all you're doing. Can I just mention one or two things, because Councillor Ball, has brought up something which obviously is of great importance, which is deprivation. And I do know that the last system, I think the North East has got the highest deprivation in Europe now, and that's poverty. And with that brings neglect. And the work you're doing is amazing, but it's also very difficult to manage because it's hidden. And we're now living in an environment where a lot of these hidden issues are coming out, whether it's financial problems, whether it's neglect, family abuse, domestic breakdowns, all these things, where there is a problem, where there is poverty, it comes up and it will be coming out. I'm finding it now, and I agree totally what you say about circumstances. I have got people who have been working hard, and all of a sudden their income has gone down, and they can't pay this, and they've got great expectations, and it is becoming stressful, and it is causing, so it's across all socioeconomic background, but probably more where there is poverty. One of the things I was going to mention is that about 8 years ago, we started some work on the Marmot Review, the Marmot Report initially, and we had a really strong working group where we actually took to pieces the years and how people could be managed or how, and one of them was postnatal, but basically we went into Morpeth, to St George's, where we went to the office there, where basically we had young parents who just come out with a young baby, unable to manage, and also there was a child psychologist there, and everybody, and we learned actually what the impact of neglect and what the reasons were, and because they couldn't manage. Now, I do think that there was a lot of valuable information and work done, and since the Marmot, we did the actual Marmot report, and we looked at it, we didn't finish it all, but since then we've also had a review, and the Marmot review, which came out last year, of the actual report, stated that actually there was more problems with poverty in the North East. So I just think, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think it was really good to get that document out again, because it gives us, encapsulate all the foundations of the work we need to do, but also actually everybody needs to understand. And it's not easy, but, you know, my view has always been every child matters. And we do have you know, I just see, you just have to see Afghanistan last night, and that was horrific. But we've got this, not in the same degree, but we've got it on our doorstep. And the better we understand it, all members understand it, the more we can actually have an input into it, and maybe help you. But it's so important, because once something goes wrong, it can be devastating. So I could make a proposal that we, as a committee, had a look at those papers and even set together, because actually it's so important that we have that understanding as a committee. The other one, just very quickly, is just on page 91. And just because I come from the West, I come from Tynedale area, so I presume that's what you're talking about, the West. It says, rising from 12% July 20 to 49% June 21, with the biggest increase in the West locality from 29 to 83. Is that because, thank you for that, and it's good, but is that because the numbers went up there, or because you were able to, I'm not sure what you were able to do there, whether it was because you were given more funding or you were made more aware or what. But, you know, if you could explain that a little bit, that would be helpful.
I don't have those numbers. I've just got sort of page 1 to 34, so I'm not sure
It's
which
page
91.
Page
it's
9.
page
Sorry
9
about
of
that,
the actual
Paula.
report
You're miles
that you've
away, I
got.
can hardly see you.
Sorry, was it page 9, did you say, Chair?
It's page 9 of the report that you're looking at.
91.
But 91 in our report for some reason.
Okay. So this is under the promoting early intervention and early help, yeah. So I'm sorry to ask this again. What was actually the question?
So the section that Councillor Dale raises is the section which is in bold. It says rising from 12% July 20 to 49%, and a question related to the biggest increase in the West locality from 29 to 83%. So I think it was the background as to why and what that is.
How did you manage that, and why did you go down that?
I mean, it was the early help service that did this, so they provide this information in the report, and I think I'd have to go back to them and ask that question, to be quite honest, because I can't answer it, you know, in any detail. I hope that's okay. I don't know whether Graham can say something, or whether, because I'm not sure that anything particularly different happened in the West.
I just want to know that. I think because, yes,
it's a good question.
I mean, what that is one of the reasons that our early help and preventive service were really effective. They looked at really creative ways of making contact with and offering support to families through a range of mechanisms, including particularly the virtual delivery of some of the groups they would have done face to face but couldn't.
Can you put have you got your...
Sorry, I've got it. I thought I got it on. I'll try. You can't see us. What happened through our early help services, when the pandemic hit, one of the ways in which they tried to maintain support and contact with families was through a range of virtual and creative methods, and one of which was a virtual delivery of a range of group works. When you might have had parents or children face to face, we were doing a lot of, particularly with parents, virtual delivery, and actually that seemed to be very effective in increasing the ongoing engagement with some of those parents. So, for example, we have one programme called Caring Dads, And now the face-to-face delivery of that is fine, but actually what we've found is a virtual delivery of that at different times of the day has actually increased the effective engagement with those people. So there'll be a range of reasons sitting behind that, but it's the more creative engagement that has helped us maintain support, contact and engagement with those families.
Yeah, I'm also wondering whether, just with the West being so rural, you know, whether actually virtual engagement, virtual sort of contacts has meant that actually the improvements have been more obvious, if you like.
Yes, I have no idea. I mean, it'd be interesting to know because I think there's various work going on. Thank you. Just to say thank you very much for that. And there was one other thing I was going to ask, and I've just flipped, gone out. Oh yes, just out of interest, I've got friends who work in the CIB with legal kind. There's a lot of complaints or concerns raised through other means, CAB, whether it is that or other things. Where do these all get referred to? Do you know?
Which complaints?
Sorry, CAB. For instance, you know, there's the CAB tab where people ring up and say, I've got problems with abuse, I've got problems with this, problems with that.
Citizen advice.
Yes, CAB, sorry, CAB. Right. Yeah, sorry, it's just, sorry about that. And I just wondered where they were referred to.
So I think, I know that if a call was made, which was highlighting some form of abuse or neglect, there is an automatic pathway for that to be reported. But if that's the specific, but Graham, if you wanted to come in on those pathways.
It would be that, and this report is about the safeguarding work of the agency, so it's particularly focused on safeguarding, but absolutely acknowledging the impacts of poverty, which adds stress, and the impact on families. But everybody has got a responsibility. If they see children who are being at risk of abuse or neglect, everybody's got a duty to report that in, and there'll be the one call number, and all of the responses would then flow from that.
Thank you very much.
I've got Reverend Lennox, and then I've got Councillor Dunn at the back, and then Councillor Dunbar.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the pandemic's had its effect upon many of the issues raised here, but there are one or two things on pages 95 through to 97 which are a note of interest. First of all, as we've often mentioned, there's been an increase in mental health in the last year, but I particularly note that there's been an increase in self-harm as well. And over the page, read the disturbing note that there have been 2 cases of children committing suicide, which is quite disturbing, really. And at the top of page 97, neglect has been the priority and stubbornly persists in Northumberland as obviously the key area of abuse. And I'm just wondering if there's any real link between the two, any correlation between the two, and if we had any information or data to consider that.
I mean, yeah, there's certainly, it would feel that in terms of correlation between the pandemic and one of the suicides, we can't know for sure, but there was certainly a feeling that actually, the lockdown and the fact the child wasn't in school, and therefore things maybe couldn't have been picked up as quickly as they could have been, may have had an impact on that one particular child. So certainly I can't evidence it specifically, but it would make sense to assume that actually lockdown, social isolation, family stress in a lockdown environment will have that, will have an impact on a child who already perhaps is vulnerable, and self-harm can be one of those signs of that. And in terms of neglect, again, I think we've sort of talked quite a lot about how the pandemic and poverty and increasing pressure on families is likely to have that impact on neglect. And I'm not sure that neglect isn't an issue. Actually, it's not just in Northumberland where it's a key cause of children needing a child protection plan, and Graham might be able to say more about that. You know, this is an issue in the North East generally, as well as just in Northumberland. So yeah, there must be correlations between all of these things.
Happy with that? Okay, then if I can bring in Councillor Dunn and then Councillor Dunbar.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to go back to Graham's previous comments, and he has sort of reiterated this a few times in this meeting, that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. You know, it has to run through everything that we do, but it's not just the professionals, the teachers and us councillors. It's got to be the general public at large. My concerns are that in these areas of deprivation that we've been referring to previously, there's the possibility, is there the possibility that when people are sort of worn down by fighting against this poverty and fighting against the things that life has thrown at them, they're stressed through it, can the expectations be lowered? And you know, there's a sort of numbness that comes to the safeguarding issues, that the tolerance level becomes a bit lower. So that would be my concern with this, is how do we raise the public knowledge of the safeguarding issue on a whole? Thank you.
Yeah.
Graham, do you want to take that one? Yeah.
I think trying to generally and continually raise the profile and importance of safeguarding is ongoing work and an ongoing challenge. And I think the point about tolerance is a good one, actually, and that can apply to professionals as well. And one of the issues with neglect, for example, and work we've done within children's social care, is making sure that we put challenge and scrutiny into our work to make sure that we don't just accept this is the way it is if things can be improved. And again, just linking back to Paula's role, being an independent scrutineer and challenger of the work we do is part of that as well, to make sure we don't become immune to or stop seeing the negative impact of things like neglect, which are quite at times hard to quantify. So as I say, we put a number of systems within professionally to make sure we're putting continued challenge into our professionals to make sure we're focusing on that. But I think the wider issue of communication around safeguarding is an important part. And so I'll give one example. So we're trying to work with communities together, Northumberland communities together, a lot of community-based work there, and making sure that understanding of safeguarding and recognition of that is a key part of that work is one example of us making sure we do that. But it is an ongoing challenge, and again, the ask as ever is for all of us to take responsibility to play our part in both spreading the word and making sure that we make our children as safe as possible.
And I think going back to your point, that's something that I maybe want to capture at the end, because as Graham's rightly pointed out, there's lots of really good comprehensive work with partners, statutory, non-statutory, around those safeguarding mechanisms and pathways. But I think maybe there is something as an action from today about a wider public awareness around how to report safeguarding. So I think if we could capture that from today, that would be a good action. So a good point there. Councillor Dunbar.
Thank you, Chair. There was a comment made earlier about cuts in children's services and how it would affect the safeguarding. It's my understanding, it always has been, that there is no real efficiencies within children's services. And I've heard a very senior officer within children's services say at one point in a meeting at corporate parenting, if there's any interventions were needed in a case of safeguarding for any children and adults as well, that the money factor outsourcing to outside foster care, foster outside of Northumberland, would not be prevented, and they would dip into reserves if necessary. And I think that's always been the case. So I'm quite confident, as being a corporate parent and the corporate parent working group, that no children in Northumberland would ever be put at risk due to lack of funding for that. I think there's a vast reserves and they would dip into it.
Certainly my experience on this point that certainly over the past few years that we've actually brought many services back in-house. in order to protect them. So I know certainly that, you know, most of the people in this room wouldn't support any cuts on anything on that, and it's certainly not my understanding that there are any cuts planned to children's services. There might be some efficiencies, which is a slightly technical thing, but yeah, so yeah, but that, thank you for raising that point. Yeah. I had Councillor Watson. Hello, welcome to the meeting. First question.
Hi Chair, thank you. Just reading on the mental health on page 13, it says that there's been an increase in the number of referrals for mental health to health agencies over the last year, and talks about primary mental health workers, and I see there has been an increase in staff from 5 to 34 for the primary mental health team. But then just further down on the page, I'm just a little bit confused that it says primary mental health worker referral and waiting times have reduced. So I can see the point on the waiting times may have reduced, because I guess that's going back to the point that you may have been able to do more virtual appointments, and so the time scales of going out to see people, and that cuts down so that you can see more people in a day. But just the point in the report where it says primary mental health worker referral has also reduced, I'm just a bit confused to that.
So did you say that was on page 13?
Yeah, so it's on page 14, at the bottom of page 14.
Okay, so it's in this report, so it says that the average waiting time for those referred to mental health teams has halved, and primary mental health care worker referral and waiting times have reduced, and more children have been seen. So the waiting times reduced and more children have been seen is I think what it's trying to say there, and then it spells out what some of those increase in numbers are. And I think there's been a massive investment in Northumberland, just as a general sort of point, in terms of financial investment, in terms of mental health, which is really, really welcome. And I've had a lot of concerns over the years around waiting times for children and you know, children being bounced around the system in terms of mental health, and that's been a massive problem. And one of the things that I was really very, very assured to see was that the investment is actually making a tangible difference to certainly the numbers of children seen, and certainly the waiting times that have been historically for years in Northumberland unacceptable, really. So I'm not sure if that answers.
I think it's just the fact that it says referral and waiting times have reduced. I would have thought referral rates would have gone up, but the waiting times have reduced.
Referral, I think, maybe it's the way it's been written. Perhaps,
Yeah,
perhaps
okay.
that's what it is. Yeah. So, so apologies for that. But overall, yes, referrals numbers have gone up, but also waiting times have gone down. So that's the message.
And just to provide you a little bit of assurance on that as well, there is a report which will be coming to facts on waiting times, which was asked for some time ago. And we're just sort of delving through some of the detail of what that's actually going to look like. So there is something coming on this which will provide you with that assurance that investment which has been put in is having an impact. So, yeah. I think I had Councillor Swinburne. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can pick up on a few points. Councillor Dunn mentioned about it being everyone's responsibility, as has been said, and I want to thank you for that, Councillor Dunn, because I see regularly for this and many other issues, you know, what are the council doing about it, and it is everyone's responsibility. I attend a monthly pub watch meeting, and the publicans there receiving training. I appreciate this is a different context, about how to identify abuse and issues and the many different aspects. And I think we could appreciate some communication on not just you know, officials or whatever, but even the general public being able to identify the signs of, you know, neglect, abuse, etc. And I appreciate that this could, you know, lead people down the wrong track or increase calls, but it could also help to identify issues. That was my first point. Secondly, you yourself mentioned about what the picture would be if we didn't do anything, or even if we did something wrong. And people may not be aware, but very recently such things were identified in a Yorkshire council where the government has now had to step in with regards to children's services and take over because of the problems that were identified there. And thankfully, you know, we are not in that position because we are doing what, I'm going to say what we need to, but we are striving to do what we need to and improving. People may be aware, you know, over the last year or so of some sad and national press news of young child cases, which are absolutely horrific. And I sought to contact the Director of Adult and, you know, Children's Services to seek assurance of where we stand, you know, because it would be horrific for such a thing to happen in Northumberland. And I was given that assurance that we have steps and processes in place for known, you know, cases in this area. And I was pleased at the response that I was given, that we have things in place. But a question that I did want to ask, and it is slightly on a different subject, and it relates to what we have in page 110. It might be page 28 on your report. Number 6, improving focus on the child's experience of services and better embedding it in practice. So there's talk in there of virtual youth clubs. I've not heard of this before. And there's a little bit of text in there. It says, one young person said, it was good to be able to talk to the youth workers that were doing detached, as I have found lockdown really hard. I'm feeling lonely. I really appreciated having a catch up with them and talking about a few things that have been on my mind. They said they will support me either when they're doing detached or I can call them if I need to talk in between. A few years ago, I did a bit of work in a primary school in my area, and this relates quite closely to something that the children themselves came out with, and it's that ability to talk on a one-to-one basis. And it was a suggestion by the year 6 in the primary school of being able to have that. And I was quite blown away that that was their suggestion that they brought forward as a bit of a big brother sort of thing. And I just wanted to ask, I've not heard of the virtual youth club. How many more have heard of it? You know, how many children are aware of it? Where can they find out about it? Who knows about it? And how available is this one-to-one thing? Because some of the work I did on exclusions, and there was a couple of samples there where children had been spoken to, and on that one-to-one, the input they give was just, I just want to go back to school. And no one had taken the time just to sit down and talk to them. And it is so valuable, and we need to be talking to the children. Some of them don't want to talk to a teacher, they don't want to talk to their parents, but to be able to talk on that one-to-one basis is a massive value. So what more can we do? And how can we access this? How can the children access this? So that's my question.
I mean, I'm sure it goes without saying that the virtual arrangements were put in place because of lockdown and the pandemic. I'm not sure how many virtual youth clubs there are, but I can go back and find out from, because it's the Youth Services report that produced that bit of information. So I can go back and find out and ask the question for you about how are they publicising it? How do kids know that they're there? Because I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out for you.
Are there any other comments, observations on the annual report? I'm not seeing any. So you'll see there that there are, I think, 7 key issues that we've been asked to look into. We've, I think, given it a good oversight. I would like to capture that issue of the awareness campaign, if we can, on a wider context, not just professionals, but wider community. I think that's a valid shout there from Councillor Dunn. So on that point, thank you very much, Paula, for presenting this to us. Thank you again for all the hard work that you and your partners do to look after our young people. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks,
if members are all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the next report, and then we'll take a short break after that. So the next item on the agenda, which is the annual report for learning and skills service 2021-2022, is going to be taken by Audrey Kingham. So Audrey, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I bring to this committee the annual report for Learning and Skills Service 2021, so last academic year. It was really helpful to have the virtual school report earlier in the context that Jane set out, so I won't repeat all of that because I think the committee have that in their head. You know, quite a challenging year, and there's a lot of information in this report. I will bring out some highlights and not go through the full report in detail that members have been able to read. I should also start by saying it's a really timely report, given that yesterday we had the publication of the government's latest white paper on levelling up, and this directly correlates to a lot of the work that these teams as part of this service are responsible for across Northumberland. So you will recall that Learning and Skills, of course it's now called Northumberland Skills, it did have that rebranding, but for the purposes of 2021 it was still called the Learning and Skills Service. That includes the skills delivery team for young people and adults, a number of vulnerable learners, particularly 16 to 18 and those up to age 24, with education healthcare plans. It includes the work of our careers guidance team and also of our wider employability and skills team. So some direct correlation, and again we talked about progressions earlier, and I'll highlight some areas there. So I'm asking the committee to consider and review the content of the report today, endorse the approach developing the Northumberland curriculum models that I'll talk about, recognise the performance given the continuing challenges of the global pandemic, and we're still living with those even in this third academic year. But actually, most importantly, and I will come back to this at the end of the report, to I guess challenge, as Chair said earlier around virtual report, challenge that the improvement areas are the accurate ones, and to seek some assurance from me to you that we will monitor those and talk about them throughout this the rest of this year. I did want to also just note the recommendations and improvement plans that I put in last year's report, and I've just highlighted those at the start of the report and said what we've actually done about them. And I know we did talk, for example, earlier around in industry and education and how we'd managed to marry those together. And you will see, first of all, this committee has already received the skills strategy, so that's come through this committee. We do try to tie in the reports throughout the year so that you can see the relevance of the work and the developments moving on. So that we see much more of our younger people succeeding. You will remember for us that in that first year of lockdown, that was a real challenge. And I'm really pleased to see, although I'm not satisfied with yet, but I am really pleased to see that that retention rate has improved by 10 percentage points across 2021. Just a reminder for all committee members that post-16 and indeed post-19, so the adult service, is very different to compulsory education. So there is a statutory expectation that attendance is 100% in schools. There is an expectation set out in the adult learning service and post-16 that attendance is expected at 100%. But of course, what we are not able to do is force and use any statutory performance to include that. So a retention statistic in the post-18 world is very important to make sure that our IAG is right. So our careers information, advice and guidance is strong for young people and adults, and they end up on the right course. They have the right entry criteria and they are able to stay on course and achieve throughout the year. And I'll talk to you a little bit about those. We talked as a priority last year to ask around more of our adult learners enrol on the right course and gain employment, and our destinations have improved significantly from last year, so I'm really pleased with that. Team have done a great job. We are seeing more than ever students progressing to the next level and to employment. And you may recall in the 2018-19 report that too many of our adult learners remained on lower level qualifications and continued to repeat lower level qualifications. That is no longer the case in Northumberland, so a really good story. And then our coherent approach working with businesses, including building relationships and benefit industry skills, schools and all of our residents. So a number of projects have come through this board across the last year, not least the introduction of the global Bridge digital platform which links schools and industry. We are developing that platform particularly to consider scholarships and sponsorships and the relationship building with industry to really prioritise our young people and our adults, indeed all of our residents across Northumberland, to be priorities within those opportunities and made available to them. We have the Port of Blythe welding and integration of planning and skills via Section 106 agreements. Again, some developments and the work completed, just rounding off the priorities we put in place last year. So I'll come back to the areas for improvement at the end of the report, because that should be my summary. And just to remind everyone that at last year's annual education report, I set out the 12 priorities identified for education and skills across Northumberland. And for this particular aspect of the service, there are 5 priorities that the service contributes towards. They are not responsible for delivery of those priorities, but they contribute a significant amount towards those particular areas. You will see peppered throughout, progression, destination, key stage 4, working with our children much earlier in schools. We'll begin to talk about the school liaison and career development service moving forward, but building opportunities and relationships to improve passage and transition into universities, if that's the right choice, into apprenticeships, into employment, and into supported routeways for some of our children who either have challenges, find it really challenging to move directly into a further education. That's our corporate parenting role, and links directly with the work that Jane was talking about earlier. It is this service's responsibility to develop broader and wider routes for all of our residents across the county, and really think a little more diversely around the opportunities and the routes that we can help everyone to achieve their ambitions. So just picking up on key issues for this particular service and this report today, we are saying that our learning and skills service remains as good in terms of an Ofsted judgment. So this is a self-assessment. We follow that annual routine. You would expect me to not have everything absolutely perfect, otherwise I'd be saying this was perhaps closer to outstanding. But there continue to be areas that require improvement, and I would expect that to always be the case. We would always want to get better at something. We may be teetering on the edge of outstanding on some aspects, but actually we want to make sure that they're consolidated and continually developed. We've talked a lot today about being dynamic and about being adaptable and able to respond. The last 2 years, 2 full academic years, we're now into the 3rd academic year, have taught us that actually we have to change and meet the needs rapidly and routinely. We're now working extremely differently, and I don't expect that we'll move back to some of the ways that we worked 3 years ago. We've talked about that as a society, as an organisation in Northumberland, and certainly as a teaching and learning organisation. It is about ensuring we can capture more of our residents in more diverse ways. What we have seen as a result of last year, it was a bit more in and out in terms of restrictions, lockdown changes, rates in schools rising. That impacted particularly on some of our engagement with adult learners. Remember again, and I did say this earlier, that a number of our students, our learners who come to the service, come to us because of the values-based opportunities that we provide. So we spend more time, we invest more for our residents in this service, and we spend more time wrapping around them to ensure that they're able to continue. What particularly hit us last year was the changing nature of restrictions, up, down, we've talked a little in Paula's report around mental health and the challenges that has for people, and the choice to remain at home rather than enrol on courses definitely impacted. What we also saw last year was the impact of parents who enrolled on courses who, as a parent myself, I can completely understand their priorities moved from their own learning, and that stopped to be able to support the learning for their children back at home, or indeed the in and out of school when there were COVID isolation periods, or in fact, if there was a COVID positive within the family or household, that definitely had an impact. And then, of course, in January, we came back and there was a rapid move to lockdown again, in which case the service remained open for our vulnerable learners, but our adult learners all continued to learn remotely. We are still on the journey of transforming the service into a responsive and dynamic service, particularly underpinning the economic priorities for Northumberland. And we'll continue to develop those routes, the models, and change really to make sure that we're able to help more of our residents into employment and in-work progression, big priority for us. A lot of work with our more vulnerable learners and residents across the county as well. In particular, some career pathway routes. We want them to feel safe and secure. We want more of our young people to move into part-time or full-time employment preferably. But actually we have work to do with industry around helping industry understand how it will be to have a member of their workforce who may have some challenges or some learning difficulties and disabilities. And so that is a big priority for us this year moving forward. This committee already received a report on Health Education England and the supported internships. And moving forward, it's not confidential, so I can say this, but we will also roll that across NCC. So Northumberland County Council will mirror that programme, and we will have more placements and opportunities. So more of some of the learners that Jane's service supports, we will be able to support in the right route way, moving into supported work first, and then into apprenticeships or scholarships programmes. You know, that is our raison d'etre, to make sure that we're here to be able to do that. So just taking us through some of the detail, picking up particularly around learning and skills service. So I've already said that the service is self-assessing as good, and we will monitor very carefully through our governance routes and our routines, which are extremely robust, to ensure that those priorities are monitored, and I expect that there will be differences and change upwards across the year. So really challenging. I've talked particularly around the impact for a number of our adult learners who enrol across the year, particularly on short English and maths programmes. And I think Councillor Ball noted earlier about the literacy and numeracy rates. And this is something that we've continued to maintain engagement with the learners. What we don't want to do is find learners are not able to continue. Clearly their priorities were their children at that particular point. But we maintained the engagement with those learners so that they didn't just become isolated back at home. A number of those learners are back on programme this year and being supported. You will note that the greatest majority of students, learners in the Learning and Skills Service are aged 19 and over, so 96.3%. If we look at the statistics and the achievement rates, for that service, it currently rests at 84%, which is the same as it was last year, actually, so in line. If we remove the English and maths statistics out of there, it actually goes up to, and I think it's 93%. I've lost the number somewhere in the report here. That gives us the assurance that the work is solid and it has a really good assured baseline that's continuing. So we must make sure that we work with individuals, and it's not about the performance rates in the classrooms, it is about the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Students and staff, a tremendous resilience across the year. I think we've all said that. I'm really pleased and very proud to say that there has not been one incident of a COVID pocket within any of the 8 campuses that we operate across the year. They have been maintained as extremely safe environments. We've managed household absences from work and school and really continued that learning as much as possible. Further investment of digital devices and systems, and we continue to do much more around that, and you will hear that in my report at the next FACS meeting, some work to go ahead. But we must be able to adapt much more quickly, given that we expect the impact and the effects of the global pandemic to be seen for some while yet. Our apprenticeship recruitment also reduced in line with adult learning. Far less industry and business investment in apprentices. There were a number of schemes such as Kickstart, which again was about pre-investing, if you like, into apprenticeships, getting young people into established work placement, giving them a paid placement, and we're yet to see the impact of those Kickstart programmes moving into apprenticeships. I am pleased to say that this academic year we are beginning to see much greater engagement in apprenticeships, so that's a really positive. What we did work hard to do was where our young people and their apprenticeships, our companies folded throughout COVID, where we worked really hard to bring them onto full-time programmes and to continue their learning and support them. Clearly that apprenticeship statistic remains as a negative for us. The positive that comes out of that is that the service worked really closely with those young individuals and some adult learners to be able to ensure that we were supporting them to continue learning. A new curriculum model was introduced, and you can see at the top of page 5 in the report 127 in the pack, it talks a little around that 6 weekly reviews. So every 6 weeks there is a formal review routine. First of all, with pupils, with learners, whether they are 16 to 18 or whether they are adult learners, the progress that is expected across that 6 weeks is reviewed. At the end of that, the course leaders also have to present a review to their managers and supporters so that we can see the progress and the impact of the interventions that are being put into place. This allowed us to see across the year where we had those challenges with adult learners, particularly around English and maths. Attendance rates drop, retention rates drop. It allows us to know on a much shorter time scale where there are challenges and whether we can rapidly do something about that. Internal progression for our learners is good. As I said, significantly changed from 2019. More than 94% of our learners progress onto another programme after their first engagement. So that's really strong. Brilliant example there of in our adult learners undertaking health and care qualifications. Of the 127, 97 of them progressed into employment. That's a brilliant example of the provision underpinning the economic priorities for Northumberland. For us, health and social care and working in the care sector will continue to be a challenge around recruitment and retention of staff. So being able to continue that learning and bring more workforce in is a real positive. Just moving over to look at our careers guidance team, again, continue. It's a statutory part of our service. We have to report routinely. We have to track, report and support learners who are at risk of being not in education, employment or training. And our careers guidance team spend their time working on that. Their role is to provide independent and objective information, advice and guidance. And therefore they have to understand the offer across the whole of the county and outside of the county to be able to support our young people in their transition. I think we talked earlier about much greater investment and potential efficiency, not necessarily savings and services, but better ways of doing things, those efficient routes. And our aim is to have a much greater offer and therefore almost a recycle of that opportunity within Northumberland rather than our children and young people and adults needing to leave Northumberland to get their provision of choice, their course of choice. You will note the September guarantee information, page 129 in the pack, particularly talks about what has to be collected at that point. Our young people are always categorised as unknown at that point and they start that significant amount of work. The September guarantee is looking at you know, where our children have moved on to, what their next steps are. And in particular, you will note that as a result, our September guarantee has a slight increase on the previous year around our figures. But if you look at the table, you will see that Northumberland outperforms the region and in particular the England stat as well. and we had certainly in the last 2 years when I've done this report, that is a continuing trend. So it is a very focused piece of work that's undertaken and really robust in terms of the outcomes. We do really want to focus that team's work, and we've started that work this year, particularly around our statutory responsibilities for careers guidance at year 9 and year 11 for our children with education healthcare plans. And so you will hear more about that in the annual report next year, and I will talk about it in the annual education report at the next meeting. So that is an area for us to improve. And I can't talk about the whole service without talking about the skills and employability team. So you can see how almost this is a Venn diagram. So we're picking up children in schools, we're picking up adults and residents in community, we're picking up the, fairly and really vulnerable residents. We're making sure that we've got an offer across the whole of the county and reaching into all wards across the county. And actually the service around skills and employability is particularly focused on project funding and monies, which allows us to be able to support some of our really more vulnerable residents through whole routine programmes working cross-partnership with DWP, particularly across North of Tyne and the North of Tyne Combined Authority. And then actually our strength and real improvement for this area. You will remember that throughout COVID we did some triage work and supported hundreds of residents who were immediately at risk as a result of their employment ending, and we moved them very quickly into new areas of work and opportunity, and some short-term training alongside that. So the things that we need to improve within our skills and learning is not necessarily the range of projects that we operate. They're really broad. You can see the stats are in here. But what we do need to improve is when they reach the end of one of these project programmes, if they have not yet, as a result of the programme or their work placement, moved into employment, is progress them into the adult learning and continue their training, support them then to move into a sponsored routeway or an apprenticeship or into employment. And you will see those as key priorities for us. So if I just go back to the beginning of the report, and there are 5 areas that I identified, or the team identified for improvement. We would like to strengthen the curriculum models and the pastoral model to support better retention and achievement. Talked about that earlier in Northumberland Skills. Continue the transformation to a dynamic and flexible demand-led service. So we are listening really carefully to what the residents and our businesses and industry want us to deliver, not what we think we should be delivering. That's the wrong way around. So really important that it's demand-led. Continue to focus on the apprenticeship model for Northumberland to meet the needs of more services and businesses. Synchronise employability programmes and create a progression model to support sustainable employment with skills training. And then lastly, but certainly not least, to underpin the preparation for adulthood agenda in 2 ways. Undertake all of the statutory education healthcare plans, reviews at year 9, plan those career pathways, and then to develop routes and partnerships and have a sustainable training and employment route for young people with education healthcare plans and special education needs support, including internally within Northumberland County Council. Thank you, Chair.
Very much for that audit, comprehensive summary there. Do I have any comments, questions from Councillor Dale?
Just say, sorry, Audrey, thank you. I'm sorry, I've got too much smack. I mean, my voice is going now. Just to say thank you very much for that report. And it's very interesting because obviously everybody wants good employment and wants employment that they actually enjoy and want to be part of. And I think I approve very much of the support to achieve well with good opportunities for employment, but to access the right programme. And I think that's so important. And that actually goes on. Actually, I'm doing work and have done work for 6 years, which I started with Robin Casson, about careers programme. And actually, it's the drive of all the way through your schooling, about your understanding about what your skills are, And especially when you get to 16 and you don't know what you want to do and there are issues in your life and concerns, that actually you've got that ability to discuss what your skills are. Because there's some people have got some wonderful skills, but nobody actually pulls it out of them. And they don't themselves actually understand what skills they have, which sounds terrible, but you have brilliant people who are fantastic wood turners. You've got people who are, my husband, for instance, couldn't sell anything to anybody. There's all kinds, but he recognises that skills because I've told him. But I mean, everybody's got a skill, and actually it's up to you, and I think that's quite the right word, that you put them on the right programme so they can actually understand. But on a longer term programme, it'd be lovely to have a conversation about what we've been doing over the last 5 years, because I've been working with businesses, in particular in the Northeast, on apprenticeships. But also the interesting thing is some of them have said to me, and we haven't had any applications for our apprenticeship programme this year. And I think that's obviously through the pandemic happening. But it has been interesting that people have come to me, people I generally work with have said there's been no applications. And I think that's possibly not just Northumberland, but other places too. So anyway, I approve very much of this, getting and making people think, well, they are benefit. They're not just going for a job because they've got to work. They want to do something that actually inspires them and will take them into the future.
Thank you for that. It is an absolute passion of mine to ensure that we ensure every person, young, adult, retraining, is put on the right route. Absolutely. We should not fail any of our children or adults. I talked about retention. The key indicator for any organisation when we are looking at training, and it is an accountable statistic for us, if that retention statistic is low, it means we've got something wrong. So it means people are not engaged in the programme. We've said, no, go on, you can do this. I've been in post-16 sufficiently long enough to know that people will say, no, come on my programme, you'll really like it on my programme. That's absolutely not what we're here for. And actually, as a county and director of education working with schools now, what we will begin to do is start those conversations so much earlier. And I recognised your comment, particularly around industry. And if Councillor Stewart were here, you'd be delighted to know, well, in fact, I am out tomorrow with Councillor Stewart at an employer in Prudhoe. I haven't been paid
He's
to say
actually
that.
watching because he sent me a text. So name
excellent.
check him.
So Councillor Stewart and I are out tomorrow talking to an employer about how we work with industry and schools. And my view is I need to invest in the team around having a school liaison and career development individual who works with the careers leads in schools. We've done some brilliant work this year, I have to say, engaging with year 11 pupils around their next steps. I'm interested at year 7, year 8, helping them so much earlier to help that. And actually helping businesses to see the opportunities that having an older apprentice, it doesn't have to be a 16-year-old, it can be a 23, it can be a 37, it can be a career direction, and help individuals to bring the richness of what they've brought from a previous career into a new career.
Of Councillor Ball. Sorry.
Can I just go back? Just to say, sorry, actually, the Prudhoe High School, because I did a lot of work with them, and I developed that skills guide. We are actually all working all together at the moment with all the businesses in Prudhoe. It's nothing new. We do get, and they deliver apprenticeships through Prudhoe High School. We have a good guidance, a career guidance evening. Last time we had one, I had over 70 businesses who came along from Network, Rail, Nexus, etc., to actually offer support. And we had, but if I can discuss that later with you, because there's a bigger programme behind it. But just to reassure you, at Prudhoe High School and within the academy, which is part of it, we're developing it through all the schools. So whenever whoever you might meet, it might be Thompson's tomorrow, Seeker or whatever, Essity, whatever. But there is also already a discussion, not discussions, we're already part of that agenda for Predio High.
Great, thank you. It'll be lovely to develop that even further.
Well, yes,
Great,
absolutely.
Thank you.
So I have Councillor Ball and then I have Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to say thank you for a great report again. And I just want to have a little bit more of an understanding. I know we've got this buy-in from larger employers within the region, so British Volt, Northumberland Line, etc., etc. What about the mid-size employers and the smaller? And how do we identify things like skill shortages and gaps for these young people coming through the ranks? Because obviously there is industry shortages that we're seeing. So I just want to know that a little bit more about that relationship between the mid-size employers and the small businesses, where we're seeing these, not only the gaps in people coming through to want them jobs, but also things like training shortages, because there is identified needs of different things. And the other thing that I would like to ask about is, obviously this is all about going into employment. Is there any emphasis on going and starting your own business, being the next business lead, and not just having ambition to go and be the best engineer for British Volt, but actually I want to run my own engineering company and I want to be the best in the world and I want to be based in Northumberland? How are we helping them people grow as well?
Great questions. I hope I've captured them all. We'll soon see, won't we? So you're absolutely spot on. And I default to it quite often, but I think generally most people default to using the large businesses. Whatever's the flavour of the moment typically gets used. Rest assured, we're committed and working with the SMEs as well. There is no doubt. We work with a number of forums. We work with Advanced Northumberland and all of their connections and industry links. But actually, the employment and skills team also have a whole raft of links. We use them for work placement in the 16 to 19 programme. So they're out there. We've got a network that we use in terms of that. And actually, just to reference, if you remember, I don't know if it was the last, maybe the second last Facts Committee, we did the Northumberland Skills Report and Skills Strategy, and we did all of that development work that looked particularly at SMEs and the level of apprenticeship and training that they needed. So we've done all of that research to inform the programmes, but it's not just about stats, it's about talking with people as well. So we are talking with them. So that's the first one. Training. Certainly as a learning and skills service, we're on a journey of transformation about perhaps doing less community-based programmes are very important, and engagement programmes, so we still do those, but actually our emphasis is moving to more training that leads to employment and outcomes, and that's a service, so big transformation around that. But it's not just what NCC, this is the annual report from the Learning Service at NCC, to provide some assurance. I also work with Northumberland College very, very closely in their transformation and development work to help them to understand the programmes that they need to offer. We routinely, about every 6 weeks, have a catch-up. As it happens, I think we've had about 4 meetings in the last week. So we do work very, very closely around ensuring. Again, our ambition is to ensure that more of our children are able to access their next steps in Northumberland, and our residents much, much closer to home. You'll notice that's one of our priorities for education, particularly for our children with education healthcare plans, so they're not travelling around the county. That is equally the same for our residents, so that they're not having to travel 60 miles to do the course of their training course of choice. And then new business entrepreneur, so I think I've captured them all. But yes, so in terms of that business development route, that's quite embryonic, but it is for us a priority moving forward. A lot of schools have got Careers Enterprise Programme built into there. They've got Global Bridge, which brings in entrepreneurship. That is some work for us to do even more about. But the Gatsby benchmarks, the 1 to 9 benchmarks that are used throughout the county, a number of our schools, entrepreneurship and business development is linked within that. But I'd like to come back and talk more about entrepreneurship when we've developed that further.
That's absolutely perfect. That's absolutely perfect and great to hear. And I look
Councillor,
forward to seeing them.
great. Councillor Dodd and then Councillor Watson.
Yeah, I welcome the report. I know a lot of work goes into this sort of area to try and get the square pegs and the square holes and all that. But something Councillor Swinburne said, and this is probably something for a future meeting and a more national picture. Councillor Swinburne mentioned about, you know, children going off to university, getting a great big debt, doing a course that they fancied at the time or whatever, that then comes back to have no relevance or very little relevance to what they actually end up doing. Are there any sort of indicators or figures on that? Because, you know, it's not. I think those of us have got children been to university. You end up with a big debt somewhere along the line. I'm not criticising that. That has to happen. But is there sort of any indicators that say they get a better job, or you know, if you understand what I'm trying to get at, to do those square pegs hit the square holes further up, or where people have actually taken a very big step to go to university?
Yes, there are some statistics to be able to show that. Office for Students is the higher education body who collects all of that information. We'll try and I'll try and collate together a report for you that gives some indication. One of the stats, again, that they are held accountable for is their retention, but significantly the destination of graduates and whether they go on, not just to be employed, but actually to be employed and use the degree from which they were awarded at the university. So I'll work with the team and we'll hopefully bring something back. If Chair and the committee would like this, we'll put that in the context of how can we develop these routes in Northumberland and talk about higher education. Higher education, you know, as a university graduate, is brilliant, and I've been that route myself, but it doesn't have to be the traditional university route way. And I know a number of committee members have talked about, if you like, the debt or the perceived debt that comes out as a result, the long term it takes to pay that off. So some development work that we're in really embryonic stages around sponsored route ways and sponsored and supported degree apprenticeships funded through Apprenticeship Levy. So we're working with a number of organisations to try and bring together a model for Northumberland around that. So with the Chair and the committee's permission, we'll bring that together in a report for you.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. I think it kind of touches on a little bit of what you've just talked about there, but it's just you mentioned, and I welcome that you mentioned the health and social care workforce and the shortage of the workforce at the moment in Northumberland, which is causing real problems and pressures on the service. So I wasn't here, unfortunately, for your Health Education England report, but I just wondered if you could touch on what work you're doing with Health Education England and to support perhaps people who wouldn't necessarily see about going to university as a way in, because obviously nursing, occupational therapists, physiotherapists are that route in normally, but there are new ways of going into that service. So I just wondered if you could touch on that. Thank you.
Certainly. So just a quick recap. The Health Education England partnership is actually a supported internship for our young people with education healthcare plans. And we're in the partnership with HE. They will do a full year working in an aspect of health education in England, and it might be a bit of a marketplace, so that, you know, a carousel of picking up a range of skills with a view to, at the end of it, we hope that they will find a niche within each of those placements to be able to see an opportunity. And that is really countering, because we know nationally Northumberland's not an outlier. We're in line with the national. Too many of our children with education healthcare plans don't go on to sustainable employment, and we really want to do something about that. That's a big priority for us. And in relation to the health sector, you're absolutely right. We are fortunate in that there's been a brand new training centre announced, which will be based in Cramlington, particularly around the needs of the wider health sector, the whole range, but actually I'm not sure that everybody understands the breadth of opportunities working within the health sector. I think, and we did some work around the skills strategy and the work underpinning that we brought here, we could probably do something a little bit more and help everyone to understand, because for us in Northumberland, that is a real challenge. Keeping, first of all, people in the jobs, but actually getting young people to think that this is a long-term worthwhile career. So the work that was done around the health sector was particularly around, you might come in at this level and do an apprenticeship, but these are your opportunity routes. And it goes back to the careers advice guidance at the start of it, and almost, I'm going to say, instilling a passion in someone much younger, you know, beginning that journey. Through our partnership with the Trust, we have just received a number of uniforms that will go into primary schools. So they're in a whole range, and that it's work like that that we will start to sow the seeds so much earlier, do that work, get work placement right, help everybody to understand the ambition and opportunities around healthcare. We have a programme with North of Tyne, which is about using our care leavers who are experts and experienced significantly in that sector and fast-tracking them into that employment route. So there are a number of ways that we're currently working. I still think we've got more to do and could do more. And as we develop some plans and infrastructure further in Northumberland, we will have to do more to accelerate the workforce. But happy again to provide you with some more detail. I'm happy to, I'll share that report with you actually, and then you've got that. And please feel free to talk to me about it.
And I think what Audrey has alluded to there is the work which is which I have to declare an interest, because that's what I do with the Trust. But those mini scrubs, those mini uniforms are going to be going out to our schools as part of a world of work. So it's about embedding at a very early stage from primary and understanding that link between learning and earning, what you can do in school, and what that could ultimately end up in terms of a job for you. And I think that's something which is very exciting and innovative about what we're doing with some of our partners. And that's just one example of how we're trying to support the importance of education with a capital E, and skills and learning, because it's not just what you do at school, it's what you do in later life as well. Continue. So it's a continuum, and we've got to get people in, and this is why this is, you know, so exciting. And just something which I just want to pick up on, and it does reference a couple of times in here to the Department of Work and Pensions and Reed running Reed, which is a private employment agency, running some contracts on behalf of DWP. And one of the things which I, you know, firmly believe, we do have labour shortages in a whole range of sectors, but we have sufficient people, and some people are locked out of the labour market either because they're simply not job ready. They may have lots of peripheral pressures around them, access to transport, concern about debt, concern about how it's going to impact on benefits and what have you. And also the fact that maybe they've genuinely just never held a job with very clear timelines of when you start, when you finish. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done. It is referenced in here around that pre-employment support.
Agree.
And actually in work support, because you might get somebody who's job ready, get them a job, and then something happens and the resilience is low. So sometimes they can almost fail before they've even really got themselves kind of under the table in work. So I think that's something that perhaps I'd like to capture later as you're working. I'm sure you'll be working with this with specifically DWP. I think there is definitely something around that in work support to maintain that employability, particularly for people who've perhaps got some challenging conditions where they've never really had to experience work before. So, right, I'm not seeing any other comments there. I think it's very exciting, very detailed report, and it shows, I think, that we're going in the right direction. So thank you very much for that. We've seen the recommendations there, and it is a partnership-wide approach to actually working forward. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a 10-minute break. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. So if we can stop the live stream, and then we'll resume again in around 10 minutes. So Welcome back after that short break to this morning's Family and Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We're going to resume this morning's agenda with item number 9, which is Children in Care and Care Leavers Sufficiency Strategy, which in your agenda pack is at page 135 to 168. And Liz and Graham, you're going to be taking this report for us this morning.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Liz Spurban. I'm the Senior Manager for Residential and Family Placement Service, so I'm going to start off talking about the report, and Graham will chip in as and when he feels he needs to. I believe a report came to the board in November, giving a bit of an overview about the sufficiency strategy that was to be written and updated and presented back to the board, to the committee, which is happening today. So the sufficiency duty is the whole reason why we've got a sufficiency strategy, which it's a duty to provide a procurement of placements for children in our care, and the statutory guidance sets out our requirements for the local authority to work with key partners to secure suitable accommodation for all its children in care. So our strategy sets out our approach to meeting this duty, which looks at the demand and also focuses specifically on right solutions. It looks at identifying appropriate planning and delivery of sufficient placements that are of a high quality to ensure that our children in care achieve their full potential. And ideally, we'd like that to be for children to be kept local within our own provision. So we've got some clear monitoring and oversight of that. The strategy is written using the guidance developed by the Local Government Association, which gives us a national framework. So we can do comparing and contrasting with other local authorities when we're looking at strategies. So just a brief overview of some of the key points of the strategy. As I know you'll have all read it, there's various information about our looked after children population. It talks about our children in care by age, by ethnicity. It talks a little bit about where our legal status, which I do note the chart is missing in this document, but it wasn't missing in the original document, so I'm not sure where that's gone in the midst of moving over on page 145. But we have got the legal status of our children care is actually 85% for committee members to be aware of that, and we will make sure the graph is put back in. A little bit of information about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and then it talks about the primary need for why children come into care, which again has already been touched on during the meeting today, so again I'm not going to repeat any of that. I think one of the main things, the key things for me to look at is what provision of placements we've got in Northumberland and the high quality care that we provide. So first of all, I'm going to start with our foster carers. We've got a strong community of foster carers that are within Northumberland that are robust and have been committed to our children in care, and that has been really demonstrated throughout the pandemic, where foster carers have really stepped up. They've continued to care for our children in difficult environment, in difficult situation, in children not being in school on occasion, or the challenges of going into school, which Jane has referred to earlier. So that's been really positive. And our carers have maximised the placements that they can give to our, they can offer us. Our carers are flexible in their approach and meet the needs of a lot of our children. We have family and friends carers, which again is mentioned in the report, which are family and friends connected who have a relationship with the child, who were subsequently approved. And again, they've been robust and great throughout the pandemic and continue to work closely with the service. We recognise we need to continue to push forward with our recruitment strategy and make sure that we recruit the right carers to meet the needs and the cohort of our looked after children. So we do look at our demographics, we look at, and that all links into our strategy. So we're aware of looking at sibling groups, carers for children long term, emergency carers, and always our teenage carers for teenagers. So for moving that forward, we are part of the regional Mockingbird programme, which was confirmed late last year. So that's alongside the 11 local authorities in the North East. It's an innovative method of delivering foster care using an extended family model. So we're at the very early stages of that. I've already had a meeting this month, and we've got the follow-ups in the next later this month for our implementation timeline, because that takes at least a year, well, 6 to 12 months to get your first hub of carers set up, and so 2 years down the it'll be 2 years before it's fully delivered and implemented. But it's something that is a work in progress, and I'm sure I'll be asked to come back at some point and feed here or into the corporate parenting group. We've also increased our training offer, which is really robust. We work closely with Jane's service, as she's already mentioned, to make sure that we've got an enhanced training programme. And Jane's team is great, and the deputy virtual head links in really well with my service. So moving on into residential care, again, a dedicated workforce throughout the pandemic, managed COVID when there's been staff with COVID or young people with COVID. That's been managed really positively within all the homes, and our young people have responded really positively, and that should be recognised. We offer our children in our residential homes receive a high level of care that's, again, consistent. Our children get placement stability when they're maintained with our own in-house provision, which is why, leading on to the second report around our children's home, but why we want to look at how we can maximise our resources and increase our in-house residential provision. We've got good commissioning arrangements when we can't meet the needs of children within our own provision, and which is on occasion when it is best, the child's needs will be best provided by an external provision, whether that be an independent fostering agency or an external residential provision. And we've got robust processes in place for monitoring and tracking those children. Our care leavers, again, we've got a supported accommodation framework that was put in place in 2021. That's more robust, and 96% of our children are in our care leavers are in suitable accommodation. And there is a bit more information around that. So the strategy highlights our objectives and what we plan to move forward. It's been developed into a clear action plan, so that it's measurable and we can see our outcomes coming from that. But I think that just about covers the key areas. I've not covered adoption. So adoption, we work with them. We're obviously part of a regional adoption agency, Adopt North East, and we continue to work in close partnership with Adopt North East. And for 2021, you can see that we placed a high number of children for adoption, and we continue to strive to secure children in a permanent adoption placement, if that is the right plan for that child. And we do place harder to place children. So that's a real positive for our children. So I think that covers the sufficiency strategy side of it.
Liz, it was remiss of me to mention at the beginning of your report that it would be sensible to actually take 9 and 10 as a single item.
If I can talk a little bit more about residential.
Yeah,
okay.
so that would be sort of just for the benefit of everybody, if there's a separate discussion around that, because they are actually interlinked.
It's very interlinked, yeah. Thanks, Chair. There is mentioned in the sufficiency strategy our aims and objectives and aspirations for our residential provision, and there is a report in there to give you an update on the new builds and the progress of that. And again, I think that came to the committee a couple of months ago, and there was some delay in this coming back to a previous committee, as we had. Following the review of our residential in-house capacity, which has been ongoing for some time, an opportunity came up with the DfE, who announced that the local authorities could apply for some funding, which they would match fund, basically, about any innovative and creative thinking around local authorities increasing their own in-house residential capacity. So that's what we did middle of last year. The bid was submitted to the DfE. The DfE were delayed in coming back to us, or to all local authorities, to confirm if they were successful, and we got that confirmation mid-December, and we were successful in having match funding against the new build, which will give us five more placements for children to remain, again, local within their communities, gives good access to their families, and it keeps people, it gives us the support to run that one. And we know that children in our in-house provision get robust support, they get better placement stability, the likelihood of the placement being longer than if a child was in an external provision is much greater. The average is about 3 years, which is what we want for our children, because placement stability reinforces their resilience as they grow and develop into adults. So that's really positive, and we're also exploring a 2-bed extension to one of our current children homes, so that would make it a 5-bedded provision. So again, we can keep children local, and in running alongside that, we're reviewing our short breaks provision to ensure that that meets the needs of our children within our community, that children with disabilities or children placed with other carers, and that supports our children in care, and that's running alongside that. We do have challenges with recruitment of staff into residential homes, but that links into some of the other discussions that have gone on about the apprenticeship scheme, and we have successfully appointed 9 apprenticeships recently. They're in the midst of starting, they're just going through the clearances, and that's a bit of a grow your own model. So they will come in, they will do some shadowing, they will do 6 months in some of the children's homes and have opportunities to develop, and their age ranges from 21 to 33. So again, different life experiences. So we're seeing that as something that we will continue to work through from enhancing our residential workforce using that model. I don't think that's mentioned in the report, but I just thought it was worth mentioning given we've talked about apprenticeships. So I think that covers where we're at with our placement provision and our sufficiency duties and our responsibilities. Okay.
Just to put this in a national context, as I've said before, there's an independent national review of children's social care and placement sufficiency is one of the key elements of that, because nationally there are shortages in terms of meeting what children some of the children looked after in terms of their placement needs. And the other bit, just to be aware of, previously we've talked about occasionally where we've struggled to find an emergency basis of placement for a young person. We've set up what we call a bespoke placement. Now, we've been very robust about how we do and monitor that, but that would be for us hiring a cottage, staffing it, making sure that young person is safe until we can find a registered or regulated provision for them. Now, since September, it has been illegal for us to place any child under 16 in that kind of placement. Now, the fact we've not placed any child since the start of the year under 16, that placement does show that our placement availability and sufficiency is pretty good, but that will always be a challenge around that. But I think what this does detail, that once we have got robust process around making sure that children only become looked after when they have to. We look at any way to make sure they can be supported safely at home or with their extended family. But what we do know, and I hope this demonstrates, is we've got a detailed understanding of our current care population, what they need in terms of the placement, and how we continue to strive to meet that need.
Obviously, everyone's had an opportunity to look through this. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Councillor Swinburne, then Councillor Dunbar, then Councillor Lennox.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this report to the committee today. A few questions I have to ask now. It's on our page 142, so I'm not sure if you have the full report. So the first point I've got is, under the analysis at the bottom of that paragraph, it has more generally a higher proportion of 5 to 9 year olds had entered care than in previous years, and there was an increase in children entering care from a specific geographical area. Are we allowed to know what specific area that is from, or is that protected information?
Yeah, I mean, we'll get that detail, but again, where children come into care from, we do present to the corporate parenting group, and I'm very sure it'll be NE24, I think, would be the increased area from which they came. But I think that reflects some of the earlier conversations we've had about the areas in which a lot of social work and social care is focused for the range of reasons that we've talked about earlier.
For the benefit of anybody watching this, NE24 is?
South East Blythe, Ashington.
We have got that data. I've got it in another report.
So
which
there is comprehensive data which is presented and heat maps which we discussed earlier. So that is absolutely available.
Another question, just following on different subject. We mentioned about the build and the extension of the residential placement, and we're aware of the delays on there. And this is where it comes into efficiencies that we've spoken about previously, because we have run to some extensive costs in placement outside of Northumberland. So by bringing it back in-house, as it were, within Northumberland, there are going to be some efficiency measures on there. On page, it's page 159. One of the what we've done is there is agreed corporate funding to increase the in-house residential placement, which we're aware of, and that's in the next report. The paragraph above that says about children with specific needs cannot always be looked after within NCC's own provision, and it details the examples there. What I want to ask is, with the additional in-house residential placement, does any of that give provision for the children with specific needs, or is it just general provision?
We're looking at other alternatives for how we can increase the provision for young people with specific and more complex needs. The home build that we're looking at the moment wouldn't be for those particularly with complex health or disabled children. It's not around that. It will be around young people who would need residential accommodation but without those additional needs. We are looking at other alternatives where we can expand the provision available for children with complex needs in terms of short breaks and what we can offer to support them within their homes. But equally, we're looking at the commissioning of external placements, and that is a challenge currently, particularly through COVID, but the availability of places for children with more complex needs.
Okay, thanks. And if I could just one more, please, Chair. I'm pleased to see the number of fostering households has increased. I did mention a few meetings ago, and I'm going to raise this again, as chair of one of our local area councils, please use the local area councils to, promote the service and advertise, come along, put paper together, put a bit of an advert out to promote the fostering service and try and get more engaged in fostering. So please use us. Thanks.
Councillor Dunbar.
Thank you, Chair. Northumberland County Council do promote fostering and regularly put out Facebook posts which I share all the time, several times. The question that I've got is really about I'm interested about the Mockingbird programme. Would the recruitment of people who are going to be part of that Mockingbird programme for the young children in care, are they going to go through the foster panel process?
Yes, the Mockingbird uses lots of terminology around constellations and hubs and things such as that, and I probably need a diagram to show you how that looks.
All right.
But we will be looking at how we develop our own in-house carers, because you end up with a hub foster carer who supports a number of other foster carers. And it becomes a bit of a community of foster carers in that way. We do that on a softer level, because foster carers we have pockets of foster carers across the county, so they do that support at a lower level, but this is a more structured format, so we employ a hub foster carer. So we may do some external recruitment to that, but we'll also look at our in-house cohort of foster carers and advertise that internally to see whether or not one of those carers, but of course that will link into our recruitment anyway, and develop that further if we because the plan is to create more than one hub, so you would create 2 hubs.
So it's a support mechanism for all the foster care. Oh, really?
Well, you end up with 2 different hubs of different groups of people, but it's a model that probably needs a bit more explanation as to how that actually looks.
Oh, well, if you can send us anything to read, that would be really beneficial, to know that.
Thank you for that.
Change career moves within the council.
Reverend Lennox, I do apologise. I think I demoted you before. I called you Councillor Lennox.
It's all right.
I'm elevating you back now, Reverend Lennox.
I'm called all kinds of things these days, but it's actually been partially answered earlier on page 151. 143, it's the proportion of children in the 5 to 9 age range that's increased. But it's the word gradual that I know it's not a blip, as it were, it's a gradual increase. And I don't know if there's any underlying factors to that.
One of the things that we did was undertake an audit and analyse, obviously, the detail of children entering care. And I think it's hard to identify underlying factors, but I think what we can do with this is, as we identify the trends, if there are different types of placement for different ages, that then helps us with the sufficiency strategy. Now, I know with 5 to 9 year olds, the vast majority of those will be placed in foster care, and it just helps us to understand the volume and number of placements that we might need for them. But I think it'd be very hard to analyse any underlying reason why there might be more 5 to 9 year olds entering care. We've had a look at it, but we couldn't find any specific trends that might indicate why that might be.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Dale, then Councillor Ball.
Can I just go back to what I initially said about Atkinson House? And this is just my concerns about the overall picture, looking forward, saying 10 years, and the amount of children we might have in care, and whether we're actually looking at a really holistic approach to how we look at this housing, well, homing these people, giving them a lovely home, and just instead of looking at just Atkinson House, but looking at the big broad picture, because you're saying about looking after people who've got different needs, etc. And I just have a concern, I think I raised that before, because not only can we, with the growing numbers that are always in the reports, more and more people coming into care, is that actually we're also having placements outside of the county, but also it's an opportunity to have income with having children coming from outside into the county, because we were able to provide a bigger build infrastructure. So it was just something I'm always trying to look forward to the future, and this, you know, short win is not always, it might be a good win, but not always the best win. So it was just something that I would like to say, put down. You don't have to respond to it, it's just my issue.
I think just dealing with the issue of income, though, I will answer that. The only unit that we've got which is set up as a business is Kylo House.
Yeah.
And that's a national secure unit, serves national needs for that, but is run by Northumberland as a business. And given, I mean, we've looked at a range of options regionally as well, but given our need for sufficiency, actually generating income, we would not be able to do that, because actually we will fill all our in-house capacity with our children. So in terms of, we wouldn't have the capacity available to offer places out with of Northumberland, because we need it. And we want to maximise the use for our children as well.
That goes back to the saying long term. Are we actually providing the further capacity for the increase in numbers? I think that's where I'm coming from overall.
Yeah, and I think this, within that, sorry, Chair. Sorry.
I'll let you finish and then I'll bring Audrey Kingham in.
Apologies, Chair. I've probably forgotten what I was going to... I mean, we are increasing our in-house capacity, and the in-house capacity in Northumberland is significantly higher than the national average. And that isn't purely about finance, and that primarily is around the quality of the provision that we can provide, because we know that we can get the support packages around it, so it's much more stable. In terms of projecting the future, I think projecting numbers, they're likely to rise, but I've got to say, not definitely, because, for example, we would never have predicted the pandemic and the rise that brought, but actually we've now significantly reduced our numbers. But I think it's reasonable, and we've catered for and planned for a gradual increase, because that certainly is what is happening nationally in terms of the numbers of children looked after. But given in Northumberland we've got very robust processes around looking at alternatives, supporting children and young people within their families and their extended families without coming into care, actually we have bucked trends over the last 6 months or so by actually reducing the numbers that we have looked after. So it's not an exact science for us, but we are catering for and planning for a gradual increase in numbers, and make sure we try and get the capacity for that.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
Audrey wanted to add a little bit more information to that as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to perhaps separate the issue around Atkinson House that's been referred to and our children's homes. So shortly we won't call it Atkinson House anymore because we must change the narrative. That isn't a criticism, Councillor Dale, in any way, shape or form, but we will have a rebrand of that will begin to describe. We know, for example, in education that we have rising numbers of children with social, emotional and mental health challenges, as well as autism spectrum disorders. They're our two largest areas. To provide some assurance, because I think what you're saying is, how do we know how many we've got coming into the system, and are we allowing for this? Are we planning for this? So in terms of education, and Graham and I work hand in hand around some of that work that we do, but specifically in education in schools, for the first time we're introducing a place planning for all our children with special education needs. That will therefore include all of the SEMH. Our transfer and proposal that's currently out to consultation, a final consultation around moving the current site based in Seg Hill, which is Atkinson House, potentially to a new site at Ponteland, to Richard Coates' site, whatever that name becomes of the new school there, because that is what it will be. And then ensure that we've got sufficient places to meet the needs of those children, but actually sufficient places not just in Ponteland, across the county. So there are a number of strategies that we are putting into place, which is back to that priority I talked about earlier, which is meeting needs of our children much, much closer to home to reduce the travelling around the county. Apologies, Chair, I just thought it was important to clarify the education and children's homes.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ball.
Yeah, it's just, I would like some clarification and a little bit of reassurance, please. Graham mentioned before about under 16s and some of the placements and how they're now dealt with, and that we can't just set them up in certain settings. So my question is basically, how close are we to that tipping point? And what happens to that young person if there simply isn't a place in Northumberland for that young person? Because the reassurance part is that the guidance suddenly doesn't become a little bit more flexible, and that a young person or a family end up in a situation for longer than they need to. So how are we going to cope as numbers increase? Thank you.
The challenge around bespoke placements has usually been on an emergency basis, and that might be a child entering care, or it might be a breakdown of a placement within care, and happens relatively rarely. We would make sure, and we do make sure, that we look at all alternatives for registered and regulated provision to make sure that appropriate to meet those children's needs. And only in circumstances where that was not available would we set up something that we call the bespoke package. Now, I've got to say, when Ofsted did come 2 years ago and looked at our processes for doing that, when it was still not illegal to do that, they were actually satisfied with the robustness about how we managed that, because at the end of the day, we have responsibility to meet the care needs of the children. So we will do that in whatever way we have to. And that doesn't mean we would, for example, leave a young person not accommodated somewhere. We would provide something at the best we could and make sure that was available for it. And if there were consequences, we'd have to argue the rationale for that. And I've got to be clear, the only time we made and make bespoke placements is when there are no alternatives for that child or that young person. That is the only time we do it. We don't do it by choice. We wouldn't see it as one of a range of options. It is absolutely a last resort where we've got to provide some decent, supported care and accommodation for that child, and it will be for the shortest time possible. We would look at it and review it as a very senior director level weekly in our panels that look out for our out-of-county provision, look at it weekly to make sure we're tracking and tracing down placements that are registered and appropriate for the child.
Any other questions, comments? Not that I can see. So I've asked that we combine those two reports, we've also got the Children's Home Bill progress, which is detailed in there as well. I think we've covered pretty much our observations and notes, which will be recorded. So on that basis, I'd like to thank Graham and Liz for their work on that, and thank you very much. We'll look forward to updates as we go forward. We're now on to item number 11 on the agenda, which is the annual engagement statement, pages 175 to 180. And Graham, you're going to be taking that one as well.
Just very briefly, and it will tie into the next agenda item as well around inspections, but just very briefly, we are required to meet on an annual basis with Ofsted. The main basis for that meeting is our children's social care self-assessment, which is forwarded to Ofsted, and we met with them and they discussed and challenged the detail and findings of that self-assessment. Overall, the meeting happened in October last year. Overall, they appreciated a lot of the work we were doing. They did put some challenge into that self-assessment, saying we perhaps didn't put enough of our data in there, which is interesting, being as a lot of our monitoring of our work is supported very effectively by our data, but we will put more in. But equally for us, the self-assessment is not just for Ofsted. We use it to help us understand ourselves and where we're at and what we need to continuously improve on, and also to share that and engage with partners for a range of reasons. So they accepted and understood that. They did see some good practice that they wanted to follow up and understand further around our work around the public law outline. That is the framework within which we undertake care proceedings or initiate care proceedings for children and young people, and some of the work we did in what's called the pre-proceedings work to try and prevent them going to court, and how we tracked and monitored that, and also some of the developments we've got around our front door and the MASH. So overall, it was a positive meeting. They did include some discussions about education in the locality and in the area, particularly around Berwick Academy and Corbridge Middle School were talked about in the conversation. But it is one part of the overall framework for Ofsted, keeping in touch with local authorities, making sure they understand where we're at. Part of Ofsted's view is to try and make sure they catch authorities before they fall. That and some of the other activity that Alan, I know, will detail in the next item is how Ofsted makes sure that they understand what is going on in the local authority. And for us, it was a reasonably positive engagement meeting in October.
Any comments, observations from anyone? I'm not seeing anything. We're asked to carry out a bit of diligence on here. The way that I'm reading this, those items 1 to 9, which are covered in the report, are pretty much it sounds as though you're actually on the ball with stuff in terms of what you're going to be doing, which is that self-assessment and being aware of some of the issues around that. So I'm happy for us to accept this report. I'm not seeing any dissent from the floor. So, Graham, thank you for that. That's gone through. That was relatively painless, unlike previous reports. So there we go. Very well done. And if it is an assurance to members, the self-assessments done by staff in this council are spot on. I can tell you that. So there's a lot of assurance there. Sorry. Right. So thankfully, again, top-notch staff here. I've just been told that we've exceeded 3 hours, so we need to suspend standing orders in order to continue the meeting. So on that basis, can I please have a show of hands that we're prepared to suspend standing orders and continue the meeting? See how painless this one is.
I think we now need a proposer and a seconder, as was pointed out.
Thank you. So, right, there we go. How painless was that one? There we go. Thank you very much for that. So, Graham, thank you. We're now moving on to the item number 12 in your report, pages 181 to 188. It's the Ofsted Inspection Frameworks for Children's Services. And I think, Alan, you're taking that one, aren't you? Over to you.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Chair. Hello, I'm Alan Hopwell. I'm the Senior Manager for Performance and System Support in Children's Services, and I was asked to pull together this report just to give elected members an overview of all of the different inspection frameworks that Children's Services is subject to. Chair, I'll talk largely to the key issues and also to the table that's in the background section of the report, and obviously happy to respond to any questions that might arise from that. As is mentioned in the key issues, Children's Services is a very highly inspected department within the local authority, and most of those inspections are undertaken by Ofsted, but as the report refers to, some of them are joint inspections that are undertaken between Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission, and the report includes details of those. And there is also the Youth Justice Service inspection, which is undertaken by the Probation Inspectorate, but most of them are undertaken by Ofsted. Elected members probably will be used to Ofsted inspections and the grades that result from them, but not all of the external scrutiny and inspection activity that takes place across Children's Services is graded. Some of it results in a narrative letter that may or may not result in priority areas for action, but they always will include details such as the strengths and also the areas for development. So there's a consistent approach there. And in general, just as is similar with adult services, one of the key indicators is the percentage of providers that are judged to be good or outstanding, and that applies across early years, it applies across schools, and also within the world of social care as well. The table on the background section attempts to illustrate just within one view the different types of inspections that are undertaken across Children's Services, and members will see that they cover early years, they cover schools, the 16 plus, special educational needs and disabilities, and also social care. And obviously that table looks at the different types of inspections, whether it's graded or not, and what the latest position is just with regards to the percentage of providers that are rated to be good or outstanding, and an idea of the latest national average as well. Figures on national averages are behind the live data that we have within Northumberland. I think it is fair to say to elected members. And in the right-hand column, you'll also see that there is, I guess, a prognosis is probably fair to say in terms of what we anticipate the future to hold in terms of inspection activity over the next 1, 2 and 3 years. I think it probably is fair to say that after this report was submitted, if I go down to the row that's about social care and about residential homes, we have received the publication of the report into Barndale House, which actually wasn't available. It wasn't published at the time this report was submitted, and Barndale House received a judgment of good in its last inspection, which took place in December. And members will notice within the report that it provides links to the various different inspection frameworks, and it also refers to a focused visit for children's social care, which we are anticipating to take place sometime within the next, certainly within the next 6 to 12 months. And the information in the appendix just gives an idea of the indicative timetable that a focused inspection is undertaken by, but Ofsted, who undertake those focused inspections, they do have some leeway in terms of when we get notification, and certainly they have leeway in terms of the topic area as well. But as Graham mentioned within the annual engagement meeting, we were given the opportunity to say what we felt might be helpful in terms of which areas we thought might be beneficial for Ofsted to scrutinise. I think, Chair, that probably covers the key points within the report, but happy to respond to any questions.
So just picking up something myself there, that background table, which is page 183, that shows whether things are graded externally, but I think that the point for members is that there are external checks and balances, there are internal checks and balances as well. And we're part of that internal check and balance, the opportunity to challenge, to question, to hold to account and to summon reports about a variety of things. So there are, as you say, Children's Services, one of those highly regulated, and if there's anything which is going to call the council into special measures, it's Children's Services going wrong. And we've got some fantastic staff working across our service. So I think this just provides for you an assurance that checks and balances are in place, and we are part of that. So that's why this role that everyone is on this committee to serve on is so important. And I know in the past it was highlighted by Ofsted that sometimes some of our scrutiny wasn't really challenging. So I think that we've had to suspend standing orders because we've gone over means that we are delving into detail and asking questions. So that provides me as chair a lot of security, and I think it should also provide you with that as well. Does anyone have any questions on the Councillor Dale?
Things, and also basically it's just like Ofsted when they come see, they want to see challenge every time you go to a school. We want to see that you've challenged everything. So thank you for this, and actually it's great to have all this on a report, and it doesn't happen with all committees, and I do look for things. And Alan, I know you've always been doing this, and thank you very much. It's great, and it also gives us the opportunity at the same time to challenge. I think we've challenged so much today that I hope you're not feeling over-challenged, because you've done a really good job, but it's great to you've been able to respond. And so, you know, and it's that importance that that you've been able to do it so well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I had Councillor Dunbar indicating to speak. Is that right, Christine? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask if any Ofsted inspections have been postponed due to COVID in Northumberland?
Not Ofsted inspections were for children's social care were not undertaken during the period of COVID for children's services. They also amended how they oversaw the children's homes inspections, but the framework now is back in operating as
Back the way it was before. Yeah. It's just that I was involved with the HMI inspection of the fire service, and that was all virtual, and it seemed to cause more problems and didn't get across the full feeling. You know, the fire service didn't get across the full feeling of what the fire service was all about, and maybe a virtual one wasn't a really good way forward.
I am aware that some elements of inspections and focus visits that have taken place, some elements of those have been done virtually. So I think it would be a bit in negotiation with Ofsted at the point at which they gave us the call.
And Audrey Kingham wants to come in on that as well.
And just to confirm that, yes, some of our schools have deferred their inspection throughout COVID. Clearly at the moment, for example, staffing challenges are significant in terms of just the volume of sickness. And for example, Northumberland's had 2 significant storm events, and we did have 1 deferral just this week as a result of damage, and combined damage and staff sickness, and therefore a chunk of the school was undertaking virtual schooling, so that has been deferred. It is usual, it's not unusual, so just to assure you.
Thank you. So any other comments, observations? I'm not seeing any. So, Graham, again.
Just very quickly, just to respond to Councillor Dale's point, the challenge is absolutely appreciated. When Ofsted come, they will look at evidence of the challenge, but equally I think we've seen examples this morning where that challenge has led to good actions and supportive actions to take things forward. So, for example, talking about the public awareness campaign, for example. So absolutely with what we'd want and expect and hope for. Thank you.
Strangely enough, I just happen to have my little black book with me. There'll be people watching this worrying now. So I've actually got the notes from feedback from Ofsted on the 31st of January 2020, and I've got pages of notes. So when we talk about challenge, this is what the inspectors actually said. There is high challenge in support. So remember this is an inspection 2020 which showed us as good. The previous inspection had been RI. Okay? So high challenge and support. Leaders get data and they get oversight to develop strengths and identify weaknesses. Partners have recognised our improved performance. That's us as a council. And interestingly, and I do want to flag this out, leadership. Decisive action taken to address issues and strengthen facts and operational performance in the council by Daljit Lally, Kath McAvoy Carr, and I was mentioned. So, sorry, I just think that that's a really important point. Leadership is everything. leadership. So,
Sorry, I'm going to put my hand up and say, can I actually recognise also that the strong interest you have taken in actually children's services? And I think that is so important. It's really people who care and actually care about the work they're doing. And it makes it so much easier, I'm sure, for officers to have people who really are involved and really care and actually understand, because you've got a very difficult position in some cases with, I mean, awful things like neglect, but they're there and they're real. So I think it's everybody, strong leadership.
yeah, and we've got a great team here, and I think that needs to be recognised. Right, okay, so Alan, thank you for that. Very helpful. And we obviously accept that report. So we now come on to item 13 on the agenda, which is the Family and Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme and Monitoring Report, which Chris Angus is going to take for us.
Thanks, Chair. Just before I come on to the work programme, I just want to raise something on the forward plan that I forgot to mention earlier, which is the budget is going to corporate services scrutiny on Monday. And the invite is extended to all members. So if all members want to attend the corporate services scrutiny on Monday, they can do. And that'll then go to Cabinet and full council on the 23rd. But on the work programme, as mentioned earlier, the report on Atkinson House will come back on the 3rd of March, as will the report around school transport governance, which I know Councillor Ball has asked for. That'll be there on the 3rd of March as well. With regards to the children and young people's mental health waiting times, there is a report half written around the service, and I can ask them to include waiting time data, and they've indicated that that could come back probably around about the summer. So if members are happy with that as a time frame, I'll go back and agree that, and we can bring that back in probably about September time, I think.
Councillor Dale.
Sorry about this. Can we just go back and just have a look at the possibility of looking at the Marmot Review, which is 2020 actually now, but it's from 2010. So it's a review of the 2010 actual Marmot Review. It's 10 years later. So, but it makes very interesting reading, because actually it shows us the up-to-date position of where we are, especially within children.
I'm sure we can share that, because there's the Marmot original and then there's 10 years on, but probably something as well that members need to be aware of. It is correct that currently we have an inequality summit, which the leader of the council is going to be hosting on the 4th of March, which will be with a number of partners, not just council, other partners will be there. It is a call to action, and it is a call to identify issues and to develop pathways and solutions. So I know a number of organisations are already involved in that, and I think there'll be more information to come out on that fairly soon. So there is something which will come out of that. Any other Councillor Swinburne?
Thank you, Chair. Not sure if we can bring a report here, but I'm going to ask anyway. You'll be aware that on my area, I was fortunate enough to have a programme put in place for school streets, which came in full effect last year. It was delayed because of COVID, and that is in relation to the safety around, in this case, a primary school, but it does affect all schools. And from that, it went on to be put in place around other schools in Northumberland. You know, the one in my area was, I think, the first in Northumberland. I'm wondering if this is now being adopted as a policy yet, or a policy has been provided, or if we can perhaps produce a report which would then provide some guidance for members along what the response was, what the result has been, and what members could then adopt or follow through to bring into place outside other schools in Northumberland, the benefits, etc., etc. Could we look into that?
Yeah, we'll pick up on that, Chris, if we can, because obviously some evaluation must have been done with it being a pilot. So we'll have a look at that and then look to bring it as a report. Yeah, so thank you. Right, any other comments on the work programme? Can't see any. Any urgent business? Councillor Ball, over to you.
I am just wondering, would I be able to have an updated copy of the budget for the meeting on Monday? Just with reference to Councillor Dunbar's comment earlier, mine seems to state that there is a reduction in funding for children's services over the next few years. So I'm guessing mine must have had a misprint somewhere. So if I could have an updated copy for the meeting on Monday, that would be great. Thank you.
I believe all the packs have gone out, so we'll have to look into that one. Right, anything else?
Chair, I
Sorry,
think they've gone out to
Councillor
scrutiny
Dodd.
members, and I think there's an invitation to people who aren't on scrutiny to find it. Just off memory, I think Jackie Rowe will be the person to ask. But as far as I know, all scrutiny members have been sent it.
So the budget I've received is correct, and so there will be
I'm not going
cuts coming forward.
But, you know, you should have it. If not, I'm going out to see Jackie Rowe and ask.
It's as I say, it's just with regards to the efficiencies that aren't coming according to Councillor Dunbar. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for this morning. It's been long, and thank you for your indulgence and actually starting a little bit earlier than normal. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.